Tricks by Ed McBain. Read by Joe Spano.
They came down the street streaming blood. No one paid any attention to them. Blood appeared to be oozing from a half-dozen wounds on the boy's face. His hands were covered with blood. His striped pajama bottoms were spattered with blood that seemed to have dripped from a wound in his belly, where a dagger was plunged to the hilt. The girl's garments screamed blood to the unusually mild October night. A bloody ice pick was stuck into her chest. Blood matted her stringy hair. Red blood stained her naked legs, the backs of her hands, and her narrow chest above the top of the nightgown. They were no older than 12. They came running up the street as though propelled by the urgency of their wounds. "Let's try here," the boy said. They knocked frantically on the door. It opened. "Trick or treat!" they shouted in unison. It was 4:10 p.m. on Halloween night. The 4 to midnight shift at the 87th Precinct was only 10 minutes old. "Halloween ain't what it used to be," Andy Parker said. His wash-and-wear shirt had food stains on it. There was a 3-day-old beard stubble on his face. At their own desks, the other detectives kept typing. "You guys writing books?" Parker asked. No one answered. "I'm going to write a book one of these days," Parker said. Hawes looked up for a moment. Big red-headed man with a white streak in the hair over the left temple where he'd once been slashed. "Ain't nobody who didn't used to be a cop can write books sound real about cops," Parker said. "One of these days I'm going to write a big fucking bestseller, go live on a yacht. Get these naked broads diving off the boat while I sit there doing nothing." "Like now," Brown said. "Yeah, bullshit. I already finished my work," Parker said. "What's the use of 7 guys when nothing's happening? I could have been home sleeping." "Instead of sleeping here," Brown said. He was a hefty, muscular black man standing 6 feet 4 inches tall and weighing 220 pounds. Brown could make an armed robber surrender just by glowering at him. "I'm resting," Parker said. "I finished my work." "Then why don't you start writing your book?" Hawes said. "Better yet, why don't you go shave?" "I'm working on my Miami Vice look," Parker said. He looked at the phone again. "You ever see it this quiet?" he asked. "I never even heard it this quiet," Brown said. "Maybe the bad guys went south for the winter," Hawes said. "Bad chance," Parker said. "This weather? I never seen an October like this. I had a case once. This guy strangled his wife with the telephone cord. I could write about that." "You could call it long distance," Brown said. "No, he was close to her when he done it." "How about local call?" "What's wrong with sorry, wrong number?" Parker asked. "Nothing," Hawes said. "That's a terrific title." "Or I could write about this guy whose wife drowned him in a bathtub. That was a good case." "Call it Glub," Brown said. "Glub ain't a best-selling title," Parker said. "Also, she cut off his cock." "Why'd she do that?" Brown asked, interested now. "He was fooling around," Parker said. "His wife came in while he was taking a bath. She shoved him under the water. Goodbye, Charlie. She cuts off his cock with his own straight razor, throws it out the window." "The razor?" "No, the cock. Hit an old lady right on top of the head, knocked this plastic flower off her hat. She bends down to pick up the flower. She sees the cock on the sidewalk. She wonders who she can sue. She picks it up, runs to her lawyer with it, goes running down the street with it in her fist. In this city, nobody even blinked." "People do crazy things," Hawes said and shrugged. "So do lunatics," Brown said. "I caught a lunatic. Killed 4 priests," Parker said. We asked him why. He said his father was a priest. "How could that be? His father a priest?" "Maybe his mother was a nun," Brown said. "No, his mother was a registered nurse. 50 years old, but gorgeous. Peaches Muldoon. Her square handle, I mean it, she was from Tennessee. A redhead. A real racehorse." "Who'd she say the father was?" "Her brother," Parker said. "It's a nice case," Hawes said. "Maybe I ought to write about that one." "Maybe you ought to look up Peaches," Brown suggested. "She's probably dead," Parker said, giving the idea serious consideration. This case was 10 years ago. He looked at the phone again. Maybe I will shave, he said. Annie Rawls was a detective first working out of the rape squad. Eileen Burke was a detective second who worked out of special forces. They were in Annie's office discussing murder. The clock on the wall read 4:30 p.m. Eileen was 5 feet 9 inches tall, with long legs, good breasts, flaming red hair, and green eyes. There was no longer a scar on her left cheek. Plastic surgery had erased that. But Annie wondered if there were still internal scars. "You don't have to do this," she said, "or it can wait till next Friday. Shit, homicide only called me an hour ago." Eileen wondered if Annie had doubts about her handling this one. She hadn't handled a really difficult one since the accident. Calling it an accident made it easier to think about. An accident needn't necessarily happen again. An accident wasn't a rapist slashing open your left cheek and then taking you by force. Annie was watching her. Annie had eyes the color of loam behind scholarly-looking glasses, short black hair, firm cupcake breasts on a slender body, as hard and as brilliant as a diamond. Annie used to work out of robbery where she'd blown away 2 guys holding up a midtown bank. Blew them out of the air. Would she have any sympathy for a decoy cop running scared? When was the first one? Eileen asked. The 10th. A Friday night, full moon. Second one turned up a week later, the 17th. Another one last Friday night. So tonight's Friday, so homicide wants a decoy. So does Alvarez. I spoke to him right after I got the call. Sounds smart as hell, but so far he hasn't got a place to hang his hat. What's his thinking on it? You don't know the canal zone, huh? No. There's an area bordering the ship canal down there. It's infested with hookers and dope. Sleaziest dives I've ever seen. Are they hookers, then? The victims? Yes, hookers. All of them? One of them was only 16 years old. What did he use? Eileen asked. Annie hesitated. A knife, she said. Suddenly it all played back again in Eileen's head. Her hand going for the Browning .380 automatic tucked into her boot. Don't force me to cut you. The pistol coming free of its holster, moving into firing position, and he slashed her face. Suddenly fire blazed a trail across her cheek. She dropped the gun at once. Good girl, he said, and slashed her pantyhose and the panties underneath, and thrust the cold, flat side of the knife against her. Against her. Want me to cut your hair, too? She shook her head, and mumbled the words incoherently. No, please. And said them aloud at last. No. Please. Please don't. Cut me again. Please. Want me to fuck you instead? Don't cut me again. Annie was watching her intently. Slit their throats with a knife, she said. Eileen was covered with cold sweat. So, I guess they want me to play hooker, is that it? That's it. They're planting you in Larry's bar, on Fairview and East 4th. Eileen nodded. Tonight, huh? Starting around 8. Where do I check in? The 7-2, you can change there. Into what? The hookers today look like college girls. Not the ones working the canal zone. Eileen nodded again. Has Alvarez picked my backups? 1. A big beefy guy. I want at least 2, Eileen said. I'm your other one, Annie said. If you want me. Eileen looked at her. I'm not afraid of using the piece, Annie said. But if you'd feel better with another man... I'm scared shitless, Eileen said. You could back me up with the Russian army and I'd still be scared. Then don't do it. Then when do I stop being scared? Eileen asked. Homicide asked me to get the best decoy possible, Annie said softly. I picked you. Thanks a lot, Eileen said, but she smiled. Who's this beefy guy? His name's Shanahan. Irish as Patty's underwear, 6 feet tall, weighs 200 pounds. I wouldn't enjoy meeting him in a dark alley, believe me." "I would," Eileen said. "Can he be in the squad room by 7? "You'll do it then?" "Only 'cause you're the other backup," Eileen said, and smiled again. But she was trembling inside. The saw ripped through wood, ripped through flesh and bone along the middle of the wooden box and the middle of the woman. Blood gushed from the track the saw made. He looked up at the clock. 5:05 p.m. He nodded in grim satisfaction and lifted the lids on both sides of the box. The woman stepped out in one piece, grinning. The audience began to applaud and cheer. "Thank you. Thank you very much," the man said, bowing. The performance was being held at the high school on North 11th. The principal, Mr. Ellington, beamed contentedly. Hiring the magician had been his idea, a way to keep these restless teenagers happy and occupied for an hour before they hit the streets for Halloween. Ellington watched now as the magician's assistant rolled the wooden box off stage. She was a good-looking blonde in her late 20s, Ellington guessed. He noticed that most of the boys in the auditorium could not take their eyes off the assistant's long legs and the popping tops of her creamy white breasts. He himself was having a little difficulty doing that. She was back on stage now, wheeling a tall box. The magician, whose name was Sebastian the Great, was wearing tails and a top hat. This was probably the closing number of the act. "Thank you, kids," Sebastian the Great said. "Thank you, Marie," he said to his assistant. "You can go now. You've been very helpful." Marie held her hands up over her head, and the kids applauded and yelled, especially the boys, and then she did a cute little sexy turn and strutted off stage in her high heels. "That's the last you'll see of Marie tonight," Sebastian said. "Shit," Ellington thought. "And in just a few minutes, you'll see the last of me, too. What I'm going to do, kids, is step inside this box." He opened the door of the box. "And I'm going to ask you all to count to 10 out loud. You all can count to 10, can't you?" Laughter from the kids. "And I'm going to ask your principal, Mr. Ellington, to come up here. Mr. Ellington? And when you get to 10, he'll open the door of this box, and Sebastian the Great will be gone. Poof. So, good, Mr. Ellington, if you'll stand here." Stepping partially into the box, he said, "I want to remind you, please, have a safe and sane Halloween. Now, the minute I close this door, start counting. Mr. Ellington, are you ready?" "Ready," Ellington said, feeling like an asshole. Sebastian closed the door behind him. 1, the kids began chanting. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Ellington opened the box. Sebastian the Great had indeed vanished. Ellington went up to the front of the stage and he held his hands up for silence. He would have to remind the kids not to try sawing anybody in half because that had been only a trick. The station wagon pulled up in front of the liquor store on Culver and 9th. The big woman behind the wheel was a blonde in her late 40s. 3 kids were in the car. The kids looked perhaps 11 or 12 years old, no older than that. They threw open the doors and got out of the car. "Have fun, kids," the blonde behind the wheel said. The kids were all dressed like robbers, little black leather jackets and little black masks over their eyes. They carried shopping bags decorated with little orange pumpkins. They were all holding little toy pistols in their little hands. They went across the street in a chattering little excited group and went into the liquor store. The clock above the counter read 5:15 p.m. "Trick-or-treat!" the little kids squealed in unison. "Come on, kids, get out of here," the owner said impatiently. "This is a place of business." And one of the little kids shot him in the head. "I feel like a new man," Parker said. In fact, he looked like the same old Parker, except that he had shaved. "Muldoon," he said. "Peaches Muldoon, where are you?" "You really gonna call a 60-year-old lady?" Brown asked. "If she was well preserved at 50, she's probably still got it all in the right places," Parker said. "Where the fuck's the file?" "Look under decrepit broads," Brown said. The clock on the squad room wall read 5:30 p.m. "Muldoon, here we go," Parker said, yanking a thick file from the drawer. The telephone rang. Brown sighed and picked it up. 87th Squad, Brown. "Artie, this is Murchison downstairs at the muster desk. They got a homicide at a liquor store on Culver and 9th. "Yeah," Brown said. "I'm gonna try to raise the guys you got out cruising." "Okay." Brown hung up. "What?" Hawes asked. "Homicide on Culver. There goes the neighborhood." The telephone rang again. "Look at this picture," Parker said, coming over to Brown's desk. "You ever see such a body?" 87th Squad. Hawes. "Look at those tits," Parker said. "My husband's gone," the woman on Hawes' phone said. "You should call missing persons, ma'am," Hawes said. "He disappeared in this precinct," the woman said. The telephone rang again. Brown picked up. 87th Squad, Brown. "Artie, this is Genero." "Yeah?" "Artie, you won't believe this. It happened again," Genero said. "I'm at this restaurant on Culver and 6th where they had the hold-up last night." "My name's Marie Sebastiani," the woman on Hawes' phone said. "My husband is Sebastian the Great." "Ma'am," Hawes said, "if your husband's really gone—" "My husband is a magician. He calls himself Sebastian the Great. He's disappeared. And I go out back to look in the garbage cans," Genero said. "See, maybe somebody dropped a gun in there or something. It happened again, Artie. I almost puked." "Yeah," Brown said. "I mean, he's really disappeared," Marie said. "Vanished. I went out back at the high school where he was loading the car, and the car was gone, and so was Frank." "Frank, ma'am?" "My husband. Frank Sebastiani, Sebastian the Great." "Maybe he went home," Hawes said. "No, we live in the next state. He wouldn't have left without me. His stuff was all over the driveway. I mean, expensive tricks." "Artie," Genero said, "are you with me?" "I'm with you," Brown said and sighed. "It was in one of the garbage cans, Artie." "What was?" "Which high school is that, ma'am?" Hawes asked. "Herman Roger High." "Stay right there," Hawes said. "I'll get somebody to you." "I'll be waiting out back," Marie said and hung up. "Artie, you better come over here," Genero said. "The Burgundy restaurant on Culver and 6th. "What is it you found in—" But Genero had already hung up. Brown slipped into his shoulder holster. Hawes clipped his holster to his belt. Parker picked up the telephone. "Peaches Muldoon, here I come." 5:40 p.m. on Halloween night. Brown had chosen to walk to the Burgundy restaurant. It wasn't far, and a cop, if Genero could be considered one, was on the scene. Genero was waiting outside. "Come on back," Genero said. "I didn't touch it." Garbage cans flanked either side of the restaurant's back door, illuminated by an overhead floodlight. "That one," Genero said. Brown lifted the lid on the can Genero pointed to. The bloody upper torso of a human body was stuffed into the can. The torso had been severed at the waist from the rest of the body. The torso had no arms and no head. "Why does this always happen to me?" Genero asked God. Monaghan was a homicide cop. He usually worked in tandem with his partner, Monroe, but there had been 2 homicides in the 87 tonight, a few blocks apart from each other, and Monaghan was here with Brown and Genero behind the restaurant on Culver and 6th, and Monroe was over at the liquor store on Culver and 9th. It was a shame. Monaghan without Monroe was like a bagel without lox. You won't need an ambulance for this one, Monaghan said to Genero. All you need is a shopping bag. He laughed at his own witticism. He sorely missed Monroe. And looks like a man, don't it? He said. I mean, no knockers? All that hair on the chest? Hello, boys, the medical examiner said, coming up the alley. What do we got? Just his chest, Monaghan said, indicating the torso. The M.E. peeked into the garbage can. Did you want me to pronounce it dead or what? A post-mortem interval might be helpful, Monaghan said. Autopsy will give you that, the M.E. said. Looks this one, Monaghan said. Somebody already done the autopsy. What did he use, can you tell? He wasn't a brilliant surgeon, I can tell you that, the M.E. said, looking at the torn and jagged flesh where the head, arms, and lower torso had been. So what was it? A cleaver? Hacksaw? I'm not a magician. Any marks, scars, tattoos? Brown asked quietly. None that I can see. Let me roll it over. Genero noticed that the M.E. kept referring to it as it. The M.E. rolled it over. None here, either, he said. Nothing but a piece of fresh meat, Monaghan said. Fidgeting nervously, Marie Sebastiani told Hawes how she'd changed out of her costume and into the tweed suit she was now wearing. Meanwhile, her husband, Sebastian the Great, a.k.a. Frank Sebastiani, had gone out behind the high school to load the car with the little tricks he used in the act. When she'd gone to meet him, the car was gone, and he was gone, and the tricks were scattered all over the driveway. By little tricks, Hawes said. Oh, you know, the rings, scarves, balls, and the birdcage. Well, all this stuff all over the place here. Jimmy comes with the van to pick up the bigger stuff. Jimmy? Frank's apprentice. He drives the van, helps us load and unload, paints the boxes when they need it like that. He dropped you both off today, did he? Oh, yes. And helped you unload and all? Same as always. And stayed for the performance? No, I don't know where he went. He knew we'd be done here around 5:30. Hawes looked at his watch. 5 after 6, he said. Gee, I don't know where he is, Marie said. He's usually very punctual. What time did you get done here? Hawes asked. Like I said, round 5:15 or so. And you changed your clothes? Yes. Well, so did Frank. Hawes was writing now. How old is your husband? He asked. 34. How tall? 5'11". Weight? 170. Color of his hair? Black. Eyes? Blue. Does he wear glasses? No. Is he white? Well, of course, Marie said. In the identifying marks, scars, or tattoos? He has an appendectomy scar, also a meniscectomy scar. What's that? Hawes asked. He had a skiing accident. They removed the cartilage, what they call the meniscus. There's a scar on his left knee. On the phone, you told me you live in the next state. Yes. Where? Collinsworth. The address? 604 Eden Lane. Telephone number? I'll give you Frank's card, she said, and dug into her shoulder bag. She handed Hawes a card. He scanned it quickly and wrote both the home and office numbers onto his pad. This, Jimmy, what's his last name? Brain. Brain? Like in somebody's head? With a Y. B-R-A-Y-N? With an E on the end. B-R-A-Y-N-E? Yes. His address? He lives with us. Same house? An apartment over the garage. And his phone number? Oh, gee, she said. I can't remember. Okay, what kind of a car was your husband driving? A 1984 Citation, a two-door coupe. Color? Blue. License plate number? DL743681. And the van? 7940 Conaline, tan. Would you know the license plate number? RL687210. Are the vehicles registered in your husband's name? Yes. Let's try calling your home. It won't do any good, Marie said. I'm telling you. He dialed Sebastiani's home and office numbers and got no answer. Marie finally remembered the number in the room over the garage, and he dialed that one, too. Nothing. Well, he said, let me get to work on this. I'll call you as soon as... What about all those tricks outside in the driveway? Marie said. Maybe we can get the school custodian to lock them up someplace till your husband shows up. I'm not sure I want to go home tonight, Marie said. I think I may want to... Could I come to the police station with you? Could I wait there till you hear anything about Frank? That's entirely up to you, ma'am, but it may take a while before we... And can you lend me some money for dinner? I'll pay you back as soon as we find Frank. I'm sorry, but I've only got a few dollars on me. This was the first time in his entire life that a victim had asked him for money. I'm sort of hungry myself, Oz said. Let's find a custodian, then go get something to eat. Monroe looked bereft without Monaghan. The clock on the liquor store wall read 6:10 p.m. He was standing behind the cash register where the owner of the store had been shot dead. There was only blood and a chalked outline on the floor behind the counter. The cash register was empty. There was 3 of them, the man talking to Meyer said. Meyer had got here maybe 10 minutes after it was over and had radioed back with a confirmed DOA. Murchison had informed homicide, so here was Monroe, alone, looking as if he'd lost his twin brother. Meyer himself thought he looked very dapper tonight. With his bald head and burly build, he figured he looked like Kojak, only handsomer. He'd always felt Kojak gave bald cops a good name. Little kids, the man said. What do you mean, little kids? Monroe asked. 11, 12 years old, the man said. His name was Henry Kirby. He was perhaps 60, a thin, graying man wearing wrinkled polyester slacks. Prepubescent twerps? Monroe asked. He was being Monaghan and Monroe all by himself. Yeah, little kids. What were they wearing? Meyer asked. Leather jackets, blue jeans, sneakers, and masks, like robbers wear. Ran out of the store with shopping bags and guns? Meyer asked. Right. What kind of guns? Monroe asked. Little guns. Like 22s? I'm not so good at guns. Little guns. Like Berettas? I'm not so good at guns. They were little guns. Did you hear any shots as you approached the store? Meyer asked. No, I didn't. I didn't know Ralph was dead till I walked inside. Ralph? Monroe asked. Ralph Adams. It's his store. He's been here in this same spot for 20 years. Not no more, Monroe said tactfully. So, where'd the kids go when they came out of the store? Meyer asked. They ran to this parked car at the curb. What kind of car? I'm not so good at cars. Was it a big car or a little car? A regular car. I'm not so good at cars. Okay. We got your name and address, Monroe said. We'll get in touch if we need you. Is there a reward? Kirby asked. We're not so good at rewards, Monroe said. You just got yourself another backup, Kling said. No, Eileen said. They were in an Italian restaurant. It was 20 minutes past 6. Eileen was due at the 7-2 in 40 minutes. She probably shouldn't be eating anyway. Going out hungry gave her a fighter's edge. Plenty of time to eat after you caught the guy. If you caught him. Sometimes he caught you. Kling was sitting opposite her, blonde hair falling onto his forehead, intent look in his eyes, wanting to know why she didn't need a tag-along boyfriend tonight. You're not just another cop, Bert. I know that. You're my... She debated saying boyfriend, but that sounded like a teenager's steady. She debated saying lover, but that sounded like a dowager's kept stud. She settled for what had once been a psychologist's term, but which was now a euphemism for the guy or girl with whom you shared an unmarried state. You're my S.O., she said. Your what? Significant other, she said. I should hope so, Kling said, which is why I want... Don't you think I can cut it? She had chosen an unfortunate word, cut. He looked at her. This time I shoot to kill, she said. He didn't want to leave the parts where they'd be found too easily, and yet he didn't want to hide them so well that they wouldn't be discovered for weeks. He dropped the first one behind a restaurant on Culver, near 6th, figuring they'd be putting garbage out when they closed tonight, hoping they'd discover the upper torso then and call the police. He wanted them to put it together in the next little while. 2, 3 days, depending on how long it took them to find the parts and make identification. By then he'd be far, far away. He cruised the streets, looking for prospects. The head, hands, arms, and lower torso were lying on a tarpaulin in the trunk. Police cars up ahead outside a liquor store. Trouble. But not his trouble. He cruised by. The police stations in this city all looked alike. Eileen could have been across the river and uptown at the 87. A pair of green globes flanked the entrance steps. White numerals were lettered onto each of the globes. 72. She flashed her shield. Eileen Burke, she said. I'm looking for Shanahan. You found him, Shanahan said. He was not as big as Annie had described him. Black hair and blue eyes, toothy grin. What Eileen's father used to call a black Irishman. Mike, he said, and took her hand in a firm grip. Come on in, you want some coffee? We only got instant, he said, and that powdered creamer stuff, but the sugar's real. Good enough, she said. Sit down, he said. He looked up at the clock. 10 minutes to 7. Ah, here's Lou, he announced, looking past her. She turned in time to see a slight, olive-complexioned man coming in. Small mustache, thick manila folder in his hand. 5'9", she estimated. Moved like a bullfighter. Narrow shoulders and waist, delicate hands. Burke, he said. He extended his hand. Light, quick grip, almost instant release. Lou Alvarez, glad to have you with us. We can use a help. Party manners or a genuine welcome? She wished she knew. I've got the file here, he said. You might want to take a look at it while we're waiting for rolls. Eileen took the folder. You can skip over the pictures, he said. She was looking at the photographs when Annie walked in. Hi, Annie said. 7 sharp. Hello, Mike, she said. How's the chameleon these days? We used to call him the chameleon, she explained to Eileen. Why the chameleon? Eileen asked. Man of 1,000 faces, Annie said, and looked at the photograph Eileen held. Nice, she said and grimaced. Pictures can't talk, Alvarez says. We got statements in there from a couple of girls working the zone. They give us an idea who we're looking for. You better take a look at those other pictures, Shanahan said. You don't have to look at them, Alvarez said. Eileen had already found them. The earlier photographs had shown slashed faces, slit throats. These showed rampant mutilation below. Use the knife, top and bottom, Shanahan said. Slashed the first girl in doorway 2 blocks from the bar, second one in an alleyway on East 9th, last one on Canal Side. I'm the one who catches him, Alvarez said. I'll cut off his balls. Eileen looked at him. Annie didn't want Eileen to keep studying those pictures. She took them, glanced at them cursorily, and put them into the folder. Most of the girls in the zone work the street, Alvarez said. The girl does the job while the trick drives them around the block. It's half-mouth will travel is what it is. But there's a bar near the docks where you get a slightly better class hooker. "What about this bar?" Annie said. "It's called Larry's. There's some girls a little younger and a little prettier who hang out there looking for tricks. The girls in the meat rack outside only get $5 for a hand job, 10 for a blow job. The ones working in the bar get double that." "The point is," Shanahan said, "the 3 girls he ripped were working the bar." "I want this guy," Alvarez said. "So do I," said Eileen. "Not the way I want him. I got a daughter the age of that little girl in there," he said, wagging his finger at the folder. "You played hooker before?" "Yes." "Okay, so I don't have to tell you how to do your job." "That's right, you don't." They glared at each other. Eileen watched him sizing her up, figuring homicide had sent him an amateur, figuring she'd be spotted as a plant. Fuck you and your daughter both, Eileen thought. I know my job, and it's still my ass out there. "These girls you talked to," Annie said, "what'd they say?" "On the nights of the murders," Shanahan said, "they remember a guy sitting at the bar, drinking with the victims, the 3 he ripped. Big blonde guy, 6'2", 6'3", maybe 200 pounds, blending in with everybody else in the joint." "Anything else we should know about him?" "Yeah, he had them in stitches." "What do you mean?" "Kept telling them jokes." "He wears glasses," Alvarez said. "One of the girls thinks he has a tattoo on his right hand near the thumb. She's the only one who mentioned it." "Do they know you in the zone?" Eileen asked Shanahan. "Yes, but then what the hell? 6 to 5 right this minute. You won't know me when I walk in," Shanahan said. "Don't take the bet," Annie said. "You're on," Eileen said. "But if I make you, I go straight home. I walk out of there and go straight home, understand? I hope I lose the bet." "You will," Annie promised. "The beauty part of this," the blonde said, "is they never expect lightning to strike twice in the same place. Are you listening, kiddies?" The dashboard clock read 7:04. "We play our cards right tonight, we go home with 40 grand, easy. I mean, a Friday night? Your liquor stores will be open, some of them till midnight. Plenty of gold in the registers, kids. No more shooting people. Have you got that?" The kids said nothing. "Especially you, Alice." Alice nodded stiffly. "There she is," the blonde said. "Number 2. The window read, "Famous brands, wine and whiskey." "Have fun, kids," the blonde said. "Trick or treat," they squealed at an old woman coming out of the liquor store. "How cute," she said to no one. Inside the store, the kids weren't so cute. Alice shot the owner at once. The man standing at the counter screamed. She shot him, too. The kids cleaned out the cash register in less than 12 seconds. One of them took a fifth of Canadian Club. They ran out of the store, giggling and yelling, "Trick or treat!" "Hello. Peaches," the man on the telephone said. "Yes?" "I've been trying to reach you all day. My secretary left your number, but she didn't say which agency you're with." "Agency?" "Yes. This is Phil Hendricks at Camera Works. We're shooting some stuff next week. My secretary thought you might be right for the job. How old are you, Peaches?" 49, she said without hesitation, lying by 11 years, but who was counting? "Perfect," he said. "This is stuff for the Sears catalog. Mature women modeling house dresses. If you give me your agency's name, I'll call them in the morning." "I don't have an agency," Peaches said. "This is Peaches Muldoon." "Yes," she said, "but I've never—" "Well, your name and number's right here, but you say you're not a model?" "No, I'm a registered nurse." "Have you ever thought of modeling?" he asked. "I'm not really beautiful enough to do modeling. There's a certain type, you know." "What type are you, Peaches?" he asked. "Well, I don't know how to answer that." "Well, how tall are you, for example?" 5'9". "How much do you weigh?" "Well, let's say well, Zoftig, I guess." "When you say you're a Zoftig type, well, you don't mean too glamorous, do you? What we're looking for, you see, is a group of women who are mature and who could be accepted as everyday housewives." "I wouldn't say glamorous, no." Let me just write down your dimensions, okay? I'll discuss it with the ad agency in the morning. Who knows? You said 5'9". What are your other dimensions, Peaches? Bust size first.
36C.
That sounds very good. Are your breasts firm?
He asked. What?
Your breasts. Forgive me, but I know the ad agency will want to know. These mature models come in with breasts hanging down to their knees. Are your breasts good and firm?
Peaches hesitated. What did you say your name was? She asked.
Phil Hendricks at CameraWorks. We're a professional photography firm.
Could I have your number there?
Sure. 847-3300.
And this is for the Sears catalog?
I want your objective opinion, Peaches.
About what?
Whether your breasts are good and firm. Can you see yourself in a mirror, Peaches?
Listen, this is making me very nervous, she said.
Take off your blouse, Peaches. Look at yourself and tell me.
She hung up. How could I have been so dumb? Gave him the answers. How'd he know my first name? The answering machine. Hi, this is Peaches. I can't come to the phone just now. Said he'd been trying to reach me all day. Got Muldoon and the number from the phone book. Oh, God. My address is in the book, too. The telephone rang again. Don't answer it, she thought. It kept ringing. Don't answer it. Ringing, ringing. If it's him, I'll hang up. Her hand was trembling. She lifted the receiver. Hello?
Peaches?
Yes?
Hi, this is Detective Andy Parker. I don't know if you remember me or not.
How about that? Parker said. Remembered me right off the bat. Told me to hurry on over. You're unforgettable, Brown said. He was typing a report on the torso they'd found behind the Burgundy restaurant. Meyer sat typing a report on the kids who'd held up the liquor store and killed the owner. Kling was thinking that Eileen was getting ready to hit the zone. He was thinking he might wander over there later tonight. So, Parker said, if nobody needs me, I'll mosey on over. We got 2 homicides here, Meyer said. Nobody needs you. In all your experience, have you ever closed out a homicide the day you caught it? Parker said. So, what's your point? Meyer said. My point is... Here's my point, he said as Carella came in. Steve, I'm very glad to see you. You are, Carella said. He was a tall, slender man with brown eyes slanting slightly downward to give his face a somewhat oriental look. Carella turned to Parker. Why are you so happy to see me? 'Cause, my colleague, Detective Meyer there, sitting at his desk in his new jacket and his bald head, is eager to crack a homicide he caught, and he needs a good partner. That lets me out, Carella said. What kind of homicide, Meyer? Some kids held up a liquor store and shot the owner. Teenagers? 11-year-olds. So, is everybody all paired up nice now? Parker asked. I got Peaches Muldoon. Who's that? Carella asked. A gorgeous nurse who's dying to see me. 60 years old, Brown said. That's an old lady, Genero said, shocked. There is nothing like a nurse, Parker said. It's a fact in the book business that if you put the word nurse in a title, you sell 1 million more copies. I'm going to write a book called The Naked and the Nurse, Brown said. You going to leave a number where we can reach you? Meyer asked. No, Parker said. The phone rang. 87th Squad, Brown.
Artie, this is Dave downstairs, Murchison said. You're handling that body in the garbage can, ain't you?
Piece of a body, Brown said.
Well, we just got another piece.
Hawes had to keep telling himself this was strictly business. Hawes wished, however, that Marie wouldn't keep touching him so often. True, the touching was only to emphasize a conversational point.
as when she told him how grateful she was that he was taking her to dinner. Marie said she felt like pizza, so he chose a little place on 4th. Red checkered tablecloths, candles and Chianti bottles, people waiting for tables. Hawes rarely pulled rank, but he casually mentioned to the hostess that he was a detective and he hadn't had anything to eat since 4 o'clock. "This way, officer," the hostess said at once. "This is really very nice of you," Marie said, and reached across the table to touch his hand, briefly. A whisper touch. There, then gone. As soon as we get back to the squad room," Hawes said, "I'll call Otto again, see if they turned up anything on either of the vehicles." A pained look crossed her face. "I'm sure he's okay," Hawes said. He wasn't sure. If her husband had abandoned her, she'd learn it soon enough. If he was dead in an alley someplace, she'd learn that even sooner. She was digging into the pizza as if she hadn't eaten for a week. She ate the way that woman in the Tom Jones movie ate. Licked her lips, rolled her eyes, thrust pizza into her mouth as if she were making love to it. Now, come on, he thought. Strictly business. "He's normally reliable, is that right?" he said. "Who?" "Jimmy Brain." "Oh, yes, completely." "How long has he been working for you?" 3 months. Excuse me," the waiter said. "Officer—" Hawes looked up. "Yes?" "Officer, there's somebody's arm in one of the garbage cans out the back." It was 10 minutes to 8. Nothing in their conversation indicated they were going out hunting for a killer. "Maybe I should have gone to Bermuda later," Annie said. "Trouble is, I wasn't sure I wanted to go." "But he asked you, didn't he?" Eileen said. She was sitting on the bench in front of the lockers, pulling on high-heeled boots with floppy tops. A holster was strapped to her ankle inside the right boot. The pistol in the holder was a .25 caliber Astra Firecat automatic. It weighed a bit less than 12 ounces. 6-shot magazine, one in the firing chamber. She would pump all 7 slugs into his face if she had to. There was a 6-shot .44 caliber Smith & Wesson hammerless revolver in her handbag, plus a switchblade. Rambo, she thought. But it won't happen again. She was wearing 2 pairs of panties under her pantyhose. Psychological weapons. "I don't know," Annie said. "I think Cotton's trying to end it." Eileen was standing now, looking down into the boots. "Can you see this gun?" she asked. Annie came over to her, lipstick in her hand. She looked into the boot on Eileen's right foot. "You might want to lower the holster," she said. "I'm getting a glimpse of metal." Eileen sat, unstrapped the holster, lowered it, strapped it tight again. "But if he wants to end it—" "I'm not sure of that." "Well, what makes you think he might want to?" "We haven't made love in the past 2 weeks." "Kling and I haven't made love since the rape," Eileen said flatly, and stood up and looked into the boots again. I'm sorry," Annie said. "Maybe that'll change tonight," Eileen said. And Annie suddenly knew Eileen was planning murder. The old lady's name was Adelaide Davis, and she had seen the kids going into the liquor store. Mrs. Davis felt like a star. "I can't believe this," she said. "They look so cute." "How many were there, ma'am?" Carella asked. Mrs. Davis thought Carella was very handsome. Wait till she told her daughter that she'd witnessed 2 murders and had talked to detectives like on television. "Well, they went by very fast," she said, "but I'd say there were only 3 or 4 of them. They jumped out of the station wagon and ran into the store." "Would you know the year and make?" "Oh, I'm sorry, no. A blue station wagon." "So when they got inside the store, these little boys pulled the guns and—" "No, they were little girls." "Girls?" Meyer said.
Yes, sir. All of them wearing these long dresses and blonde wigs. They look like little princesses."
"Princesses," Carella said.
"Yes," Mrs. Davis said. "They wore masks that covered their faces with sort of Chinese eyes on them, slanted, you know. Well, maybe Japanese. Well, like your eyes," she said to Carella.
"So they ran into the store," Carella said, "and pulled the guns."
"Yes, and shot Mr. Agnello and the other man who was in the store with him."
"Then what?"
"They came running out. I guess they would have shot me, too, if they'd seen me."
"You were lucky," Carella said. "What did they do then?" Meyer asked.
"They got back in the station wagon, and the woman drove them off."
"There was a woman driving the car?"
"Yes, a blonde woman."
"What was she wearing? Would you remember?"
I'm sorry."
Monroe was coming out of the liquor store.
"This a witness here?" he asked.
"A very good witness," Carella said. Mrs. Davis was suddenly glad she hadn't told him she'd wet her pants when she saw those little girls shooting Mr. Agnello. The patrolmen riding Charlie 4 were making another routine run of the sector when the man riding shotgun spotted it. Joe Guardy opened his notebook. "Didn't we get a bolo on a 40 Conaline?" He snapped on the roof light. "Yeah, here it is," he said. "Bolo Tan, 7940 Conaline, RL 687210. Blue 84 citation, DL 743681. The word bolo stood for be on the lookout. "Let's check it out." License plate from the next state, RL 687210. Joe slid open the door in the van, leaned in, and thumbed open the glove compartment. The van was registered to a Frank Sebastiani, whose address was 604 Eden Lane in Collinsworth, over the river. The arguing couple came up the street toward the building where they lived, passing a group of teenage girls dressed like flappers, wearing sequined dresses with wide sashes, beaded bands around their foreheads, giggling and acting stoned. The couple paid no attention to them. They were too busy arguing.
"You don't know how to be gentle. All you want to do is jump on me like a goddamn rapist." "I do not consider passion rape," he said. "You're a maniac is what you are." "That's right, I'm a maniac. You're driving me crazy is why I'm a maniac."
They were entering their building. He lowered his voice. "Let's do it in the elevator, okay?" he said.
"No, Roger, I don't want to do it in the goddamn elevator." He stabbed angrily at the elevator button. "Where do you want to do it, Elise? When do you want to do it, Elise?"
"Later."
"When later?"
"When Johnny Carson goes off."
"Do you think Johnny Carson would wait till we were off to do it?"
The elevator opened. At first, they thought it was the lower half of a scarecrow or something, a Halloween prank. Some kids had tossed half a stuffed dummy into the elevator. Then they realized that a jagged, bloody edge of torn flesh showed just above the dummy's waist, and they realized that they were looking at the lower torso of a human being. Elise screamed, and they ran to the payphone on the corner where Roger breathlessly dialed 911. The cruising cops in Boy 2 responded within 3 minutes. One of the cops, although he should have known better, went through the stiff's trousers and found a wallet. Inside the wallet, which he also shouldn't have touched, he found a driver's license with a name and address on it. Peaches still looked good. Good legs. Well, the legs never changed. Breasts firm, hair as red as he remembered it, maybe with help from Clairol. Wearing a simple skirt and blouse, high-heeled shoes. Parker was glad he'd shaved. "I didn't realize what was going on," Peaches said. "I mean, he gave me his name." "Phil Hendricks, right?" Parker said. "Camera works."
"Right. And his address and his phone number?"
"I'm sure all that was phony. I had a case once this guy would call numbers at random hoping to get a babysitter.
He'd finally get a sitter on the phone, and he'd tell her he was doing research on child abuse. Smooth talk these 15, 16-year-old girls into slapping around the babies they were sitting. While he was on the phone, he'd be masturbating, Peaches said. Well, yes. I'm afraid he might come here, Peaches said. Well, these guys don't usually do that, Parker said. They're not your rapists or your stranglers, usually. Usually, Peaches said. Yeah, Parker said. Now, with this guy who called you tonight, he already knows there's a Peaches Muldoon living here, and he already got you into going pretty far with his little routine, so he may call back. You gotta let me know if he calls again. Oh, I will, Peaches said. I really appreciate this. Oh, well, come on. I'm just doing my job. Are you on duty right now? Not exactly, Parker said. Want to come to a party? She said. Marie Sebastiani was showing them another card trick. You've all seen me put the 3 aces into the deck, right? Who'd like to shuffle? Me, Genero said. He was sure the secret had to do with shuffling. Okay, Detective Brown, she said. Pick one of those 3 cards. Either the ace of clubs, the ace of diamonds, or the ace of spades. Clubs, Brown said. She rifled through the deck, cards face up. She found the ace of clubs and tossed it onto the desk. Detective Meyer, she said. The ace of spades, he said. Where's the trick? Genero said. If you're looking at the cards, of course you're going to find them. Right you are, she said. Here's the ace of spades. She tossed it onto the desk. Which card do you want? She asked Genero. There's only one left. And which one is that? The ace of diamonds. Okay, she said. Find it for me. Genero started looking through the deck. It isn't here, he said. But I saw you put it back in the deck, he said, baffled. Yes, you did, she said. So where is it? I give up. Where is it? Right here, she said, grinning. She reached into her blouse and pulled the ace of diamonds out of her bra. How'd you do that? Hawes asked. I'll tell you sometime, Marie said, and winked at him. The telephone rang. Carella picked it up. Steve, this is Dave downstairs. Let me talk to either Brown or Genero, okay? Preferably Brown. Hold on a sec, Carella said, and extended the receiver to Brown. Murchison, he said. Yeah, Dave? It looks like we maybe got an ID on that body been turning up in bits and pieces. A couple found the lower half in an elevator. If it's the same body. Wallet in the guy's pocket, driver's license in it. You better run on over there. I'll notify homicide. What's the address? Brown asked. Got it, he said, writing. And the name on the license? Okay, he said. We're rolling. He put the receiver back in the cradle. Let's go, Genero, he said. We just got ourselves the lower half. Name tag on it this time. So what's his name? Genero asked. Frank Sebastiani, Brown said. Marie fainted into Genero's arms. The clock behind the bar, a big ornate thing rimmed with neon, read 5 minutes to 9. Through the window, Annie could see the white Cadillac edging into the curb. The man behind the wheel was big and black, wearing pimp threads. Eileen got out of the car, hidden pistol tucked into one of those soft, sexy boots, high-stepping toward the door. Mr. Pimp rolled down the window, yelled something to Eileen. Eileen sashayed back, started shaking her head. She's giving him sass, the bartender said, and he don't like it none. Mr. Pimp came storming out of the car and slapped her. Eileen staggered from the blow. She went at him as if she'd kill him, but he shoved her toward the bar and then strutted back to the caddy. Eileen was nursing her cheek. She glared at the caddy as it pulled away. Act 1 had begun. 4 pieces had become 1. Maybe.
The morgue stank. "There's no question they're the same body," Carl Blaney said. Marie looked down at the pieces. The lower half of the torso was naked. "Would you know his blood type?" Blaney asked. "Yes," Marie said. "B." "Well, that's what we've got here." "Recognize anything?" Brown asked. She nodded. "What do you recognize, ma'am?" "The scars." "Would you know what kind of scars those are?" Blaney asked. "The one on the belly is an appendectomy scar. The one on the left knee is from when he had the cartilage removed." "That's what those scars are," Blaney said to the detectives. "Anything else, ma'am?" Brown asked. "His penis," she said. Neither Blaney nor any of the detectives blinked. This wasn't the Meese Commission. This was a group of professionals trying to make positive identification of a corpse. "There should be a beauty spot, I guess you'd call it," Marie said. "On the underside, on the foreskin." Blaney lifted the corpse's limp penis in one rubber-gloved hand. "This?" he asked, indicating a birthmark the size of a pinhead. "Yes," Marie said softly. Blaney let the penis drop. The detectives were trying to figure out whether or not this added up to a positive ID. No face, no hands to examine for fingerprints, just the blood type, scars, and the birthmark, what Marie had called a beauty spot, on the penis. "What do you think?" Brown said. "How tall was your husband?" Blaney asked. "I got all that here," Hawes said, and took out his notebook. 5'11", 170, hair black, eyes blue, appendectomy scar, meniscectomy scar. "If we put a head in place there," Blaney said, "we'd have a body some 180 centimeters long. That's about 5'11". I'd estimate the weight, given the separate sections here." "That is my husband," Marie said, and turned her head into Hawes' shoulder and began weeping gently against his chest. The hotel was far from the precinct. He'd deliberately chosen a flea bag distant from the scene of the crime. 5 separate scenes, if you counted the head and hands. Scenes in a playlet entitled "The Magical and Somewhat Sudden Disappearance of Sebastian the Great." Good riddance, he thought. "May I help you, please?" the desk clerk said. "I have a reservation," he said. "The name, please?" "Theo Hardeen," he said. Wonderful magician, long dead, Houdini's brother. "That's for the one night. Is that correct, Mr. Hardeen?" "Just the one night, yes." "Do you have any luggage, sir?" he asked. "Just the one valise." "I'll have someone show you to your room," he said, and banged a bell on the desk. "Front!" he shouted. "Have a nice night." A bellhop in a faded uniform showed him to the 3rd-floor room. Turned on the television. Waited for the tip. Got his 50 cents. Looked at it in the palm of his hand, shrugged, and left. What the hell had he expected? Run-down joint. Well, that's why he'd picked it. No questions asked. 9:15. 45 minutes before the 10 o'clock news. He wondered if they'd found the 4 pieces yet, or either of the cars. He'd left the citation in the parking lot of an A&P shortly after he deep-sixed the head and the hands. He lay on the bed and relaxed for the first time today. By tomorrow night, he'd be in San Francisco. Eileen was still fuming. In the mirror behind the bar, she could still see the imprint of his hand on her cheek. The bartender ambled over. "I'm Larry," he said.
This is my place. Eileen nodded. You're new, Larry said. So, she said. So I get a piece, he said. Talk to Torpedo, she said. I don't know nobody named Torpedo. You don't, huh? Well, ask around. Torpedo Holmes. Meanwhile, fuck off. You see that lady sitting there at the end of the bar? Larry said. Eileen looked over at Annie. She's new, too. We had a nice little talk minute she come in. I'm getting 20% of her action just for letting her plant her ass on that stool. Mister, Eileen said, you're asking for more shit than you're worth. She swung off the stool, long legs reaching for the floor, and swiveled toward the phone booth. Annie thought, God, she's good. In the phone booth, Eileen dialed the hotline number at the 7-2. Detective Alvin Robinson walked into Larry's not 10 minutes after she placed her call, eyes challenging under the brim of his hat. He did a cool pimp shuffle over to where Eileen was sitting. You giving my folks trouble? Robinson said to Larry. You got a phone in that pussy wagon of yours? Larry said, toughing it out, though he'd never seen a meaner-looking black man. I read her the rules, pal, Larry said. Don't pal me, pal, Robinson said. I ain't your fucking pal and I don't live by no rules. You never heard of Torpedo Holmes. You got some quick learning to do. Nobody cuts my action, man. I own this place, Larry said. You listening to me, man, or you running off at the mouth? I'm telling you I don't cut my action with nobody, not the law, not nobody else running girls, most of all not you. I mean, I got rules here, man. You want me to shove your rules up your ass, man? Together with that jar of tomato juice. This little girl there, she's gonna sit here as long as she likes, you dig, man? And if I'm happy with the service she gets, then maybe I'll drop some other little girls off every now and then. Give this fucking dump some class. He threw a $50 bill on the counter. And this is for whatever she wants to drink. When that's used up, I'll be back with more. You better pray I don't come back with something as a sharp end. You gonna treat Linda nice from now on? All I said to the lady, what you said don't mean shit to me. I don't want no more phone calls from her. I don't mind a nice-looking girl in the place, Larry said. Robinson put his hand on Eileen's shoulder. Now, honey, he said, go easy on the sauce, 'cause Daddy got some nice candy for you when the night's done. See you, Torp, she said, and offered her cheek for a kiss. From the other end of the bar, Annie said, I wish I had a man like that. Nobody had been killed, but not for lack of trying. Martha Frey, the 40-year-old woman who owned the store on Culver and 20th, said that 3 of them, wearing clown suits and masks with bulbous red noses and grinning mouths, had started shooting the minute they walked in. I can't believe they missed me, she said, and made the sign of the cross. Either that, or they were nervous, Carella thought. 3 times in 4 hours your seasoned pro could spook. No less a handful of grade schoolers. Did you see who was driving the car? Carella asked. No, Martha said. Did they say anything to you? Meyer asked, when they came in. Nothing. How about when they were cleaning out the register? One of them said, Hold it open, Alice. I guess he meant the shopping bag. Alice? Carella said. A girl? A woman, yes, Martha said. Carella thought this was carrying feminism a bit too far. Well, this little girl, he started to say, but Martha broke in. A woman, she said. Not a little girl. These weren't children, Detective Carella. They were midgets. I used to work the high wire with Ringling. Broke my hip in a fall, quit for good, but I still know midgets when I see them. These were midgets. Peaches and Parker were the only ones not in costume. I'm a cop, Parker said. I'm a victim, Peaches said. Parker showed his shield to everyone he met. A white man in blackface, dressed as Eddie Murphy, dressed as the Detroit detective in Beverly Hills Cop, said, I'm a cop,
and showed Parker a fake shield. "I'll go quietly," Parker said, and hugged Peaches. 10 minutes to 10. "They don't even need to know we're there," Kling said to Hawes. "We take one of the sedans, just cruise the streets." Across the room, Brown was getting a description of Jimmy Brain. He was ready to bet the farm that Sebastian the Great's apprentice had chopped him into pieces. "This guy's extremely dangerous. Juked 3 hookers already," Kling said. "And you think they may need help, huh?" Hawes said. "Annie and Eileen?" "White or black?" Brown asked. "White," Marie said. "His age?" 32. "Height?" "About 6 feet." "Weight?" "About 180, something like that." "Color of hair?" "Black." "Eyes?" "Brown." "Any identifying scars, marks, or tattoos?" Brown asked. "Not that I know of." She was sitting on a bench, her hands folded on her lap. Her face was still tear-stained. "I don't want her getting cut again," Kling said. "You think she wants to get cut again?" Hawes said. "Tell me what happened before you left the house today," Brown asked Marie. "Was Brain behaving differently in any way?" "Same as always," Marie said. "Did he get along okay with your husband?" "Yes. Well, he wants to be a magician, you see. My husband was very patient with him, always willing to explain a sleight, helping Jimmy with his patter, taking time to guide him. Detective Brown, I'm willing to give you anything you need to find Jimmy, but I can't believe he did this." "Well, we don't know that for sure either," Brown said. "How do you get along with him?"
"Jimmy's like a brother."
"Eileen knows her job," Hawes said flatly. "So does Annie." "She didn't know her job when that son of a bitch—" Kling caught himself. "I'm going out there tonight," Kling said. "With you or without you." Brown walked over. "Here's the way I figure it," he said to Hawes. "You caught the missing pea. I caught the pieces. Turns out it's the same case. You and me can team up on this one. How's that sound to you?" "Sounds good," Hawes said. "I'll tell Genero," Brown said. "You okay?" Hawes asked Kling. "I'm fine," Kling said. "Mrs. Sebastiani," Hawes said. Marie looked up, face tear-streaked, blue eyes rimmed with red. "I wanted to know what you plan to do," he said. I don't know what I plan to do," she said, burying her face in the already sodden handkerchief. Hawes watched, awkward in the presence of tears. "You have to go home sometime," Hawes said gently. I know, she said. "There are calls I'll have to make. Frank's mother in Atlanta, and his sister. I suppose I'll have to make funeral arrangements. Oh, God. How are they going to... What will they... Hawes was thinking the same thing. The body was in 4 separate pieces. It didn't have hands or a head. "That'll have to wait till autopsy anyway," he said. "I thought they'd already done that." "Yeah, but we're dealing with a murder here, Mrs. Sebastiani, and we need to know... Well, for example, your husband may have been poisoned before the body was... Well..." He cut himself short. This was a goddamn grieving widow here. "There are lots of things the medical examiner can tell us," Hawes concluded lamely. Marie nodded. She said, perhaps to herself, "How will I live without him?" The school custodian who answered the night bell was the one who'd locked Sebastian the Great's tricks in a storeroom this afternoon. Peering through the grilled upper glass panel of the door at the back of the building, he recognized Hawes at once. "Evening, Mr. Buono," Hawes said. "Hey, how you doing?" Buono said. He was a man in his late 60s, thinning gray hair, thin gray mustache over his upper lip. He clipped his ring of keys to a loop on his pocket. "This is my partner, Detective Brown," Hawes said. "Nice to meet you," Buono said. "You come back for the stuff?" "Well, no," Hawes said. "Few questions we'd like to ask you." Buono immediately figured they knew he was stealing supplies. "Hey, sure," he said, and tried to look innocent. "Come on over to the office. We can talk there." They walked down a locker-lined corridor. They passed a wall clock that read 20 minutes past 10, a bulletin board, a poster reading, "Sebastian the Great, Halloween Magic, Auditorium 4 p.m. Beneath the lettering was a black-and-white photograph of a good-looking young man wearing a top hat and bow tie. "Okay to take that poster?" Brown asked. "Sure," Buono said. "Come in handy we find the head," Brown said to Hawes. At 20 minutes past 10, Larry's bar was buzzing with activity. Eileen sat at one of the tables talking to a blonde hooker named Cheryl, who was wearing a white silk blouse unbuttoned 3 buttons down. There was nothing under the blouse. Cheryl sat with her legs spread. Eileen could see track marks on Cheryl's naked white thighs. She was telling Eileen how she'd come to this city from Baltimore, Maryland. "Got off the bus," the girl said, "and this kindly old man asks can he help me with my valise. Had to be 40 years old, am I right? A nice old man being friendly. Tells me a nice young girl like me that I was only 17. Had to be careful in the big bad city. Lots of people waiting out there to victimize me." Eileen figured there were only 2 men who could be Shanahan. Guy sitting at one table had a hook nose that could have been phony, black hair and blue eyes like Shanahan's, about his height and weight. "Mr. Nice. Turns out to be Big Daddy," Cheryl said. "Takes me to his apartment. Introduces me to 2 other girls living there. Nice girls, like me. Has me shooting horse before the week is out. He turned me out 2 days later with a businessman from Ohio. Guy asked me to blow him. I didn't even know what the fuck he meant. Man, that seems like ages ago." "How old are you?" Eileen asked. 22, Cheryl said. "I got me a new man. Takes good care of me." Eileen's eyes kept roving the bar. Guy talking to Annie was another possibility. "This guy I got now. You know Ham Coleman?" "I don't think so." "Hamilton? Hamilton Coleman." "Yeah, maybe." "Black as his name. Coal, you know. Coal man. He's hung like a stallion. Likes to parade around the pad with only a towel around him. Dares the girls to snatch it off. It's like a game he plays with the towel. Snatch it off, suck his big dick, he lays the dope on you. I mean, it's just a game, 'cause he keeps us supplied very nice anyway. It's kind of cute, though, the way he struts around in that towel. Ham Coleman. You ever think of moving, you might want to come over. We don't have any redheads. Is that your real hair?" "Yeah," Eileen said. "'Cause mine is straight from a bottle," Cheryl said, and laughed. She had a little girl's laugh. 22 years old, hooked on heroin, in the life since she was 17. There were 4 liquor stores on Culver Avenue between the last one hit on 20th and the eastern edge of the precinct territory on 35th. After that, it was the neighboring precinct's problem, and welcome to it. They drove up Culver to the last store, and then doubled back to the one on 23rd. The dashboard clock read 10:32 p.m. The store was empty, except for a man behind the counter who was slitting open a carton of Jack Daniels. He looked up when the bell over the door sounded, saw a burly, bald-headed guy and another big guy with him, and immediately placed his hand on the stock of the shotgun under the counter. Meyer flashed the potsy. "Police," he said. The hand under the counter relaxed. "Detective Meyer," he said. "Detective Carella, 87th Squad." "What's the problem?" the man said. He was not quite as bald as Meyer, but getting there. Brown eyes, slight build, wearing a gray jacket with the words Allen's Whiskies stitched on the breast pocket. "Who are we talking to, sir?" Meyer asked. "I'm Alan Zuckerman." "Is this your store, sir?" "It is." "Mr. Zuckerman," Carella said, "there have been 3 liquor store holdups on Culver Avenue tonight, starting at 9th and working uptown. If there's a pattern, and there may not be, we think your store is next in line." "You don't know me, huh?" Zuckerman said. "Should I know you?" "Alan Zuckerman. I was in all the papers last year this time. Last October I shot 2 people come in the store to rob me. With this," Zuckerman said, and yanked the shotgun from under the counter. "Bang!" Zuckerman said, and Meyer flinched. "One of them falls, screaming." "I seem to recall that now," Meyer said. "Mr. Zuckerman, you can put up the shotgun now, okay? Shotgun Zuckerman, they called me. They had the story on television, too. Nobody tried no tricks here since, I can tell you that." Zuckerman slid the gun under the counter. "What we were thinking," Carella said, "is maybe we could lend you a hand. Backup, sort of." "Only in case you need us," Meyer said. "Sort of ride shotgun to your shotgun," Carella said, nodding. "Listen, you want to waste your time," Zuckerman said. "That's fine by me." He yanked the phone from the receiver the moment it rang. "Hello?" he said.
"Hi,"
Marie said. "Where are you?"
"Metro West. I'm catching the 10:45 home."
"How'd it go?"
"Tough night. Any trouble on your end?"
"Nope. I saw it on television. Who's on the case?"
"Assault and pepper team. Brown and Hawes. Big redhead, big black guy. They got a bulletin out. They asked me for descriptions. They're watching the airports. What time do you get to Frisco?"
4:47.
"I'll try you at the hotel around 6:30. You'll be registered as Jack Quinn, right?"
"All the dead ones," he said. "Like Sebastian the Great."
"Give me the number of your Hong Kong flight again."
United 805. Leaves Frisco at 1:15 Sunday.
"You think that passport'll work?"
It cost us $400. It better work. Why? You running scared?
"Nerves of steel. You should have seen me with the cops."
No problem with the ID, was there?
"None."
You did mention the cock.
"Oh, sure.
The little birthmark and all?
Come on. We went over this 100 times.
You went over it 100 times.
You going to start on me again?"
I'm sorry.
"You ought to be. All we've been through."
There was a long silence.
"So, what are you going to do till noon tomorrow?"
I thought I'd go down for a drink, then come back and get some sleep.
"Maybe you ought to call me later tonight, okay?"
Sure,
"Be careful."
she said and hung up. For a working girl, all you done so far is sit and drink, Larry said. I'm particular, said Eileen. Particular ain't for the canal zone. Eileen knew he was pointing out the obvious. The name of the game was money, and a hooker working a bar wasn't a girl at the Spring Cotillion. Larry was already suspicious, and that was dangerous. Get a few more guys giving her the fisheye, and she might blow the real reason she was here. Any man who came in alone walked out not 5 minutes later with a girl. According to Shanahan, the girls, even some of them on the canal-side meat rack, used a hotbed hotel up the street, or any one of 50, 60 rooms for rent in the zone. She glanced down the length of the bar to where Annie was sitting in earnest conversation with a little Hispanic guy. Eileen tried to catch Annie's eye. They had figured out beforehand that if they wanted to talk, they'd do it in the ladies' room. Eileen wanted to dope out a scam that would cool Larry's heat. "Torpedo Man's gonna whip your ass," Larry said. "You want to make a little side bet?" Eileen said. "You want to bet I go home with 6 bills before the night is out?" Annie finally looked over. Eye contact. Brief nod. Eileen started for the ladies' room. The Hispanic guy sitting next to Annie got off his stool. Good, she thought, she's ditching him. But the Hispanic guy walked straight toward her. "Where you going, Mama?" he said. Loud voice for a little twerp. Spanish accent you could cut with a machete. Looked like an undernourished biker in his leather jacket. The guy gripped Eileen's elbow and steered her toward the stool she'd abandoned. "Hey, come on, Mama, we have business to talk about." Same loud voice plunked her down. "My name is Arturo. I've been watching you, Mama," and signaled to Larry. "See what my friend is drinking," Arturo said. She couldn't make a fuss about the ladies' room now, not with Larry standing right here and believing she was turning down tricks left and right. Spot Annie trailing her in there, they'd both be out of business. "Larry knows what I'm drinking," she said. "So, how much you get, Mama?" Arturo said. "What are you looking for?" "This sweet little thing here," he said, and put his forefinger on her lips. "That'll cost you 20, she said. Going price, in case Larry was listening, which of course he was. As soon as Larry was out of earshot, Arturo whispered in perfect English, "I'm on the job, play along." Eileen's eyes opened wide. Larry started back toward where they were sitting. Arturo had his hand on Eileen's knee, and he was peering down the front of her blouse. She was saying, "'Cause, I'm a working girl, Artie, so I'd like to get started if that's okay with you." As they started out, they almost collided with a man coming in. He was at least 6'2", with wide shoulders and a broad chest, thick wrists, big hands. He was wearing jeans, sneakers, and a yellow turtleneck sweater that matched his hair. He looked like a heavyweight fighter in training. "You're not leaving, are you?" he asked Eileen. She breezed right past him, but her heart was suddenly pounding. Annie sat at the bar wearing a short, tight black skirt, purple tube top cradling her cupcake breasts, high-heeled patent leather shoes, blood-red lipstick, eyelids tinted to match her top, looking more like a hooker than any of the real ones in the place. She thought, terrific. Here he is. Eileen the decoy, me the backup, and in he walks. If it's him. He sure as hell looked like the blonde guy Alvarez and Shanahan had described. No eyeglasses, but the same height and weight, the same bulk. Standing just inside the doorway, looking over the place, cool, confident in his size, ready to take on any guy in the place, mop up the floor with him. This cat had nothing to worry about, oh no. Handsome as the devil, oh so cool, scanning the room, checking out the girls, then walking up toward the bar, passing the cash register where she sat. "Hi," she said. "Want to join me?" Lou Alvarez had called his buddy Danny Ortiz in narcotics, asking him to run on over here, hit on the decoy, take her outside to preserve her credibility. "You saved my life," Eileen said. Bit of an exaggeration, but at least he'd saved her cover. "Want a neck?" Ortiz said. "Pass the time?" "That's the best offer I've had all night," she said. "But I gotta get back in there." Ortiz looked at her. "Our man just walked in," she said. He seemed to fill the entire room. Sitting next to him, Annie was scared, if this was the guy. "What's your name?" she asked. "What's yours?" "Jenny," she said. "I'll bet." "Well," she said, "my straight handle is Antoinette Lefevrier, but who'd believe that on a hooker?" "Oh, is that what you are?" he asked. Voice almost toneless. Looking in the mirror, checking out the other girls as he talked to her. "No, I'm a famous brain surgeon," Annie said, and smiled. He did not smile back. Turned to look at her. Eyes the color of steel. A chill ran up her spine. "I like them younger," he said, "and fresher." One of the dead girls had been 16. The others were in their 20s. Keep him here, she thought. Don't let him wander off to any of the younger girls in here, or he'll score another one tonight. "I mean, what can I tell you? I'm not a teenager, but I'm pretty good for an old lady," she said. "Get lost," he said. "Let's get lost together,"
she said, touching his thigh. Get lost, he said. Eyes blazing, hands clenched on the bar top. Sure, she said. Relax. She walked to the other end of the bar. Her palms were wet. Guy sitting next to him at the bar was running a tab. $20 bill under a bowl of peanuts. Big, flashy Texan, sporting a diamond pinky ring and a shirt as loud as he himself was. He was drinking martinis and talking about soybeans. So, what do you do? The Texan asked him. I'm in insurance. Which wasn't too far from the truth, soon as Marie made the insurance claim. Lots of money in insurance, the Texan said. At double indemnity, the policy came to $200,000. More money than he could make in 8 years' time. By the way, my name's Abner Phipps, the Texan said, and extended a meaty hand. He took the hand. Theo Hardeen, he said. You see that thing on television tonight? Phipps said. What thing was that? Somebody chopping up a body, leaving pieces of it all over town. Bad enough you kill somebody, you gotta chop him up in pieces afterward. I mean, there are 2 rivers in this city. Why didn't he just throw the whole damn body in one of them? That's where the head is, he thought, and the hands. Well, who can figure out the criminal mind? Phipps said. Not me, that's for sure. I have a hard enough time selling insurance. I talk myself blue in the face, and half the time they're not even listening. People just don't listen anymore, Phipps said. Or they don't listen carefully enough. I'll give you an example, he said, and then thought, come on, he's too easy. On the other hand, it might teach him a valuable lesson. He took out a dime and a nickel. What have I got here? He asked. 15 cents. Okay. Open your hand. Phipps opened his hand. Now I'm putting this dime and this nickel on the palm of your hand. I see that, Theo. Now close your hand on them. Phipps closed his hand. You've got that 15 cents in your fist, am I right? Still there, Phipps said. A dime and a nickel? A dime and a nickel, right. Okay. I'll bet you, when you open your hand, one of them won't be a dime. Come on, Theo. You're looking to lose money. I'll bet you the $20 under that peanut bowl, okay? You got a bet, Phipps said. Okay. Open your hand. Phipps opened his hand. Same dime, same nickel. You lose, Phipps said. No, I win. The bet was that one of these coins wouldn't be a dime no more. No, you weren't listening. The bet was that one of them wouldn't be a dime. One of them isn't. One's a nickel. He slid the $20 bill from under the peanut bowl. You can keep the 15 cents, he said. Train speeding through the night, leaving behind the mills and factories just over the river, coming into rolling green land. By Christmas, they'd be sitting fat and pretty in India. A person could live on 10 cents a day in India. Well, you could rent a luxurious villa, staff it with servants, live like royalty just on the interest the 200,000 would bring. New names, new lives for both of them. Never mind trying to live on the peanuts Frank had earned. She'd have to call his mother as soon as she got home, then his sister. Had to arrange some kind of funeral. Have to keep the casket closed, of course. She'd call the insurance company Friday morning. Tell them her husband had been murdered. Make her claim. $200,000, she thought. Go to the beach every day. Have someone doing the cooking and cleaning. Buy herself a dozen saris. Learn how to wrap them. Maybe get herself a little diamond for her nose. And all they'd had to do for it was kill him. He approached Eileen the moment she sat down. No eyeglasses, no tattoo, but otherwise their man down to his socks. She didn't realize until this moment how frightened she really was. May I sit down? Please do. The prim and proper hooker, but crossed her legs to show him thigh clear to Cincinnati.
I'm Linda, she said. Are you looking for a good time? That depends, he said. On what? On what you consider a good time, he said. That's entirely up to you. What's your name? She asked. Howie. Howie what? How are we going to keep him down on the farm? He had them in stitches. Shanahan's words. What's your real name? Howie asked her. Eileen Burke, she said. The name would mean nothing to him. If he was their man, he'd learn soon enough who Eileen Burke was. If he was looking for action, her name wouldn't mean beans to him. May I call you Eileen? You can call me Lassie if you like. Totally devoid of a sense of humor. Flat, steel-gray eyes reflecting nothing. Were they the eyes of a triple murderer? So, where are you from, Howie? I'll ask the questions, he said. Now you sound like a cop. I used to be one. Bullshit, she thought. Really? You don't believe I was a cop, do you? Howie, I'll believe anything you tell me. You tell me you used to be a Presbyterian minister, I'll believe you. An astronaut, a spy. I was with the Vice Squad in Philly. So, what happened? Didn't you like the work? They fired me. Can't stay away from the job, though, huh? What does that mean? You been here before? Eileen asked. First leading question she'd asked him. A couple of times. Come on, Howie. Tell me the truth. You really dig the girls here, don't you? They're okay. Some of them. Which ones? Lots of girls, you know. They're here against their will, you know. Tell me the secret. How do I get out, Howie? There are ways. A big, wiry, gray-haired guy walked over from the bar. Had to be in his mid-50s, grizzled look, sailor's swagger. Wearing jeans and white sneakers, blue t-shirt, gold crucifix hanging on a chain. Right arm in a cast and a sling. Shaggy gray eyebrows, knife scar angling downward through the right brow. Brown eyes, thick nose broken more than once. He sat and said, "Buzz off, preacher." Howie looked at him. "You hear me, preacher? Move!" Howie shoved back his chair. He glared angrily at the guy with the broken arm, then walked out into the street. Annie was up and after him. "Thanks a lot," Eileen said. "You just cost me—" "Shanahan," he said. "Put your hand on my knee. Dog nice." The midgets came in at a minute before 11. They came in yelling, "Trick or treat!" Alice opened fire at once. Zuckerman went down dead in the first volley. Neither of the detectives got off a shot. Meyer went down with a bullet through his arm and another through his shoulder. Carella went down with a bullet in his chest. The more Parker presented himself as a fake cop, the more he began feeling like a real cop. Everybody told him his shield and his gun, a .38 Smith & Wesson Detective Special, looked very authentic. He felt like a bona fide detective on the world's finest police force. It was peculiar. Even more peculiar was the fact that he was having such a good time. Peaches Muldoon had a lot to do with that. She was the life of the party, and some of her exuberance rubbed off on Parker. She told everyone stories about what it was like growing up on a sharecropper's farm in Tennessee. She told them her first sexual experience was with her father. Told them her brother's first sexual experience, other than with the sheep who was his steady, had been with his sister, Peaches Muldoon. She told everyone she enjoyed her brother more than she had her father. Everyone laughed. Only Parker knew that the stories were true. She told him 10 years earlier that her priest-killing son was the bastard child of a relationship with her brother. A little after 11, Peaches suggested that they move on to another party, which is how Parker got to meet the wheelman and one of the midgets on the liquor store holdups. There were a lot of things bothering Brown about the Sebastiani case. The three most important things were the head and the hands. He also wondered where Brain was. The Blues from the 2-3 located the citation in the parking lot of an A&P not far from the River Dix. The techs had crawled over the car like ants, lifting prints, collecting stain samples, vacuuming for hairs and fibers. Brown had no illusions about the lab getting back to them before Monday. Meanwhile, both cars had been dumped, which left Brain without wheels. His last location had been where he'd dropped the citation. Was he now holed up somewhere near there? Had he cabbed to a hotel someplace else? Or was he already heading for parts unknown? He also wondered why Brain had killed his mentor and employer. "Mrs. Sebastiani's an attractive woman," Brown said to Hawes. Hawes had noticed. "Let's say they had a thing going, Brain and the woman. Okay? And let's say the hubby tipped to it. You're thinking the movies, television. I'm thinking real life, too. Hubby tells Brain to lay off. Brain's still hungry for her. He chops up hubby and him and the woman right off into the sunset. Except Brain's the only one who rode off," Hawes said. "You think she's home yet?" Brown asked and looked up at the clock. 10 minutes past 11. "A half hour or so to Collinsworth," Hawes said. "She was catching the 10:45. "Why don't we take a ride out there?" Brown said. "What for?" "Toss that apartment over the garage. See if we can't find something." "We'll need a warrant." "We haven't even got jurisdiction across the river," Brown said. "Let's play it by ear, okay? If the lady's clean, she won't ask for a warrant. Now, you want to call her first?" "Why?" Brown said. "I love surprises." Kling thought Eileen was dead wrong about this one. His being there in the zone could only help an undercover situation that had been hastily planned and recklessly undermanned. This time, he was dead wrong. They sat at the table talking in whispers, just another hooker and a potential trick. Negotiating the deal, Larry figured. Never seen the guy with the broken arm before. Wondered who'd be on top, and the sack might get a little clumsy with that arm in a sling. "Howie Cantrell is his real name," Shanahan whispered. "Used to be with Vice in Philly. 6 years ago, he started beating up hookers, then began preaching salvation to them. The Philly PD didn't mind the beatings, but they didn't like the idea of having a plainclothes minister on the force. They sent him up for psychiatric, and the shrinks decided he was under considerable stress as a result of his proximity to the ladies of the night. Retired him with full pension. He started his missionary work all over again here in the zone. Everybody calls him preacher. He looks for the young ones, spouts Jesus to them, tries to talk them out of the life. Takes one to bed every now and then for old time's sake. He's armless." "I thought he was our man," Eileen said. "We did too at first. Questioned him up and down, but he was clean as a whistle. We should have warned you about him. How's it going otherwise?" "I almost lost my virginity, but Alvarez bailed me out. You could have told me I'd have help." "We're just full of tricks," Shanahan said and smiled. "You gonna plant yourself in here?" Eileen asked. "I'll be outside, watching, waiting." Annie was coming back into the bar. She wasn't alone for a minute when a big black guy sat down next to her. "Bring her outside," Shanahan said. And then, in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "I'll see you around the corner, honey." Eileen went over to Annie. "I got a one-armed bandit waiting in a car around the corner," she said. "He's looking for a hands-on trio, him in the middle, both of us dancing his meat around the block. You interested in a dime for 10 minutes' work?" "Dimes add up," Annie said, and got to her feet. "Hurry back," the black man said. "I did not appreciate all the shooting," Quentin Forbes said, looking petulant. He was still wearing the dress, pantyhose, and low-heeled walking shoes he'd worn while driving the station wagon. The wig was hooked over the arm of a chair. "There was no need for such violence, Alice. I warned you repeatedly." "It was only insurance," she said and shrugged. "The costumes were all the insurance—" "The costumes were bullshit," Alice said. She was a beautiful little blonde woman in her late 30s. Blue eyes and a cupid's bow mouth, perfect legs and breasts, 4 feet, 2 inches tall, and weighing a curvaceous 71 pounds. In the circus, she was billed as Tiny Alice. She was now wearing a dark green dress and high-heeled pumps. To Forbes, she looked wildly sexual. The point of the costumes
The point was that you wanted to put on a dress, Alice said. I think you enjoy being in drag. I do indeed, Forbes said. First time I've been in a woman's pants in more than a month. The two men who'd been in on the hold-ups were sitting at the table in their clown suits counting the money. That's 5,000, one of them said. High Munchkin voice, brown eyes intent. His name was Willie. In the circus he was billed as Wee Willie Winky. Alice was the only one who'd shot anyone. He was sure the police would come breaking in at any minute, all because of Alice. He had never heard of a midget getting the electric chair. He did not want to be the first one in history. Can I trust you, little crooks, to give me a true count? Forbes asked. You can help count it, the other man at the table said. He was shorter and more delicate than even Alice. His name was Oliver. In the circus he was billed as Oliver Twist. Oliver was a great ladies' man. Full-sized women considered him too darling for words, and they were always amazed that they could swallow him to the hilt without gagging. Being a midget had its benefits. My rough estimate, Forbes said, is we took in something like 40,000. I think that's high, Alice said. Standing at the mirror, putting on her lipstick. Forbes had tried making her last year. She'd said he would break her in half, although he knew she was sleeping with half the Flying Dutchman. 13,000 each store, Forbes said. There wasn't any 13 in that store with the lady owner, Oliver said. He was the one who'd cleaned out the register in the third store. They weren't supposed to talk in the stores, but he'd yelled, Hold it open, Alice, because Alice's hands were trembling, and the bag was shaking as if there was a snake in it. There was 32,000. Something like 80 grand apiece, Oliver said. You wish, Alice said. 8, I mean. We should have finished those cops, Alice said idly. Willie shivered. What I'm going to do right now, Forbes said, is get out of this dress, put on my own clothes, and then I'm going to go partying. Alice, you want to come along? She looked him up and down as if seeing him for the first time. She called her mother-in-law the moment she was in the house. The place felt empty without him. Mom, she said, this is Marie.
I was just about to call you. This must be psychic.
Susan Sebastiani believed in psychic phenomena.
I had this terrible premonition that something was wrong. I said to myself, Susan, you'd better call the kids. Are you okay?
Mom, Frank.
Oh, my God. Something's happened to him. I knew it.
Mom, he's dead.
What? Oh, my God. Oh, dear God,
she said and began weeping. Marie waited. I'm sorry, Mom. I wish I wasn't the one I had to tell you.
I'll come up just as soon as I can. I'll call the airlines, find out when there's... What happened? Was it an automobile accident?
No, Mom. He was murdered.
What are you talking about? Murdered?
Someone killed him, she said. After a show we did this afternoon.
Who?
We don't know yet. The police think it might have been Jimmy.
Jimmy Brain, who Frank was teaching?
Yes, Mom.
Why would he do such a thing? Frank treated him like a brother.
We both did, Marie said.
Have you called Dolores yet?
No.
She'll have a heart attack,
Susan said.
You'd better let me tell her. I'll tell her to come there right away. You'll need help. What is it from her house, an hour?
Tops. Marie's voice broke.
Sweetie, be brave. I'll come up as soon as I can. Meanwhile, Dolores will be there. Oh, my God. So many people I'll have to call. When is the funeral going to be? They'll want to know.
Well, they'll be doing an autopsy first.
What do you mean? Chopping him up?
Opportunity right there to tell her he was already chopped up. She let the opportunity pass. They have to do an autopsy in a murder case, she said. Both women fell silent.
I know how much you loved him,
Susan said. I did, Mom. Another silence. Good night, Mom. Marie looked up at the kitchen clock. Only 40 minutes left to what had been the longest day of her life. The clock on the hospital wall read 25 minutes past 11. Lieutenant Peter Burns was standing in the corridor with Deputy Police Commissioner Howard Brill. The men could have been cast from the identical bullet mold, except that one was black and the other was white. Did you see this? Brill said. He showed Burns the front page of one of the morning tabloids. The headline looked as if it had been written for a sensational rag that sold at the local supermarket. Instead of Hitler reincarnated as Iowa housewife, it read, Midgets 2, Cops 0. Police caught short. I got one cop in intensive care and another one in surgery, and they're making jokes, Burns said. How are they? Brill asked. Meyer's okay. Carella, he shook his head. The bullet's still inside him. They're digging for it now. What caliber? .22, Burns said. They're worse than a .45, those low-caliber guns, Brill said. Hit a man where there's real meat, the bullet hasn't got the force to exit. Ricochets around in there like it's bouncing off furniture. Burns nodded bleakly. Lot of shooting tonight, Brill said. By now they're thinking psycho, he thought. Some guy who hates all hookers is systematically eliminating them. They ought to boot up their computer check with Kansas City. It was only 2 of them. Well, you start small, right? In Chicago, it was 3. Do 'em a little song and dance in each city. Listen to the newspaper and television applause. Take my bow and shuffle off to Buffalo. Slit their throats. Carve up their pussies. Cops have to be thinking psycho. I'll do 4 here, he thought. 2, 3, 4. A nice gradual escalation. A psycho acts compulsively, hears voices inside his head. Me, I never hear voices unless I'm listening to my Walkman. I kill these girls because... Ooh, excuse me. I beg your Parmigiana. Mustn't get the feminists on my back. They'd be worse to deal with than the cops. Next city, maybe I'll do 5. Nice arithmetical progression. Keep having fun, just the way Mother wanted it. These women, got it, Miss Steinem, are fun to do. Keep on looking for a psycho, go ahead. When all you're dealing with is somebody as sane as Sunday. Larry's bar. Welcome home, he thought. This guy comes into a bar, has a little monkey on his shoulder. Huh? Larry said. This is a joke, he said. The bartender asks, what'll it be? The guy says, Scotch, and the monkey says, same for me. The bartender looks at both of them and says, what are you, a ventriloquist? The monkey says, were my lips moving? That's a joke, huh? Larry said. Gin and tonic, he said, and shrugged. Larry said, you been in here before? Nope, first time. You look familiar. People tell me I look like Robert Redford. Now that's a joke, Larry said, and put the drink in front of him. He paid for the drink, sat sipping it, eyes on the mirror. Got some nice black girls in here tonight, Larry said. This old guy is sitting on a park bench, crying his heart out. Another guy sits down next to him, says, hi. He turned. My name's Cheryl. Want a party? The minute he saw her, he knew she was going to be more fun than the others. Something in the way she looked him mischievously in the eye. A fun girl. He could tell that at once. Well, hello, Cheryl, he said.
Well, 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 hello to you, she said.
Barkeep, he said. See what the lady'll have.
Barkeep? I love that, Cheryl said. A fun girl. What's your name? She asked.
Robert Redford, he said. His first name really was Robert.
Oh, I believe you, she said, and winked at Larry. What do people call you? Rob? Bob? Bobby?
Bobby, he said, which was absolutely the truth.
Want to have some fun? He said. I'll tell you what I get, Bobby, she said. A handjob's...
Not yet, he said. He put a $20 bill on the bar top.
Let's say we're running a tab, he said. You mean you and me, or you and Larry?
You and me. The 20 buys 20 minutes. $1 a minute.
How's that sound, Cheryl?
No problem, she said, and scooped up the bill.
So, where are you from, Bobby? She asked.
Most recently, Chicago. Before that, Kansas City. Those were the two cities exactly, playing the game for the ultimate risk. This soldier is in the men's room taking a shower, Bobby said. Is this another joke? Larry said.
You should learn not to interrupt a story.
Bobby spoke the words very softly.
Do you understand? When I'm telling a story, be quiet.
Larry looked into his eyes. Then he shrugged and walked to the other end of the bar.
Let me hear the story, Bobby, Cheryl said.
This soldier is taking a shower. All the guys in his company are crowded around the stall looking at him. That's because the guy has a penis that's only an inch long. Finally, the guy can't take it anymore. He turns and yells, "What's the matter? You never seen anybody with a heart-on before?" Cheryl burst out laughing. Larry grimaced sourly.
I love your stories, Bobby, she said.
You're a fun girl, he said.
That's what I've been told, Bobby.
I'll bet you like to do new and exciting things, don't you?
Oh, sure, she said. I even did it with a police dog once.
I meant new things, exciting things.
Well, to me that was new. 6 guys watching while I did it with a police dog.
It may have been new, but I'll bet it wasn't exciting, Bobby said.
Well, I'll have to admit, when the dog went down on me, that was sort of exciting. Once you get past the idea of him being a dog, which was disgusting, of course. Cheryl, I think you're terrific. I really do. We're going to have a lot of fun together. You'll see.
The second party was even better than the first. Parker was having the time of his life, maybe because there were all sorts of interesting people there, most of them women. Or maybe because these interesting women all found him interesting. He thought he was just being his usual shitty self. Peaches, in fact, was becoming irritated that Parker was suddenly the center of so much female attention. When the female midget walked in at 25 minutes to 12, Peaches immediately checked out the man with her. Burly guy going a bit bald, but with a pleasant, craggy face and a seemingly gentle manner. Peaches moved in before the other sharks smelled blood and sailed off with him, leaving the midget standing there looking shyly into the room. Parker had never seen a more beautiful woman in his life. "Small world," he said. To his enormous surprise, the night was full of surprises. She laughed and said, "Where's the bar?" Hal Willis came into the squad room at 20 minutes to midnight. The team's usually relieved at 1/4 to the hour, and so he was early, which was a surprise. Since he had taken up with Marilyn Hollis, he was invariably late. "Let me fill you in," Kling said. He told Willis about the 3 midgets who'd held up a series of liquor stores. "Midgets?" Willis said, amazed. He told Willis that Carella and Meyer had taken 3 bullets between them and were at Buena Vista Hospital. Brown and Hawes caught a homicide, Kling said. The paperwork is on Brown's desk. There's a picture of the victim, too. They found him in 4 separate pieces. 4 pieces? Willis said, amazed. There's a number you can reach them at in Collinsworth, in case anything breaks. They got an all-points out on a guy named Brain. I'll be checking out a car, he said to no one. The clock in the corridor read 11:47 p.m. Sarah Meyer had brown hair and blue eyes, and lips her husband considered sensual. Teddy Carella had black hair and brown eyes, and lips that could not speak, for she had been born deaf and mute. Sarah had not seen the inside of a synagogue for more years than she cared to count. Teddy scarcely knew the whereabouts of her neighborhood church. But both women were silently praying for the same man. Sarah knew her husband was out of danger. It was Steve Carella who was still in surgery. They spotted him the moment they came back into the bar. They headed immediately for the ladies' room. Inside, Annie lighted a cigarette. "He's our man, isn't he?" Eileen said at once. "Looks like him. Hitting on the wrong hooker." "You better move in," Annie said. "Cheryl won't like it." "She'll like a slab even less." "Will Shanahan know he's here?" "He'll know, don't worry." Eileen nodded. "I'm ready." Annie searched her face. Then she said, "Let's go then," and tossed her cigarette into a toilet. The cigarette expired with a short, tired hiss. He was telling another joke when Eileen took the stool on his right. Blonde, 6'2", 6'3", 210 easy. Eyeglasses. A tattoo near his right thumb. A blue heart lined in red. So he says to the old man, "Why are you crying?" The old man just keeps sitting there crying his eyes out. Finally he says, "A year ago, I married this beautiful 26-year-old girl. I've never been happier. Before breakfast each morning, she wakes me up and blows me. Then she serves me bacon and eggs and piping hot coffee, and I go back to bed till lunchtime. She blows me again before lunch, serves me a hot, delicious lunch, and I go back to bed until dinner time. She blows me again before dinner, serves me a terrific meal, and I sleep until morning when she wakes me up with another blowjob. She's the most wonderful woman I ever met." The guy looks at him. "Then why are you crying?" he asks. The old man says, "I forgot where I live." Cheryl burst out laughing. Eileen was thinking about the dead hookers he'd had in stitches. "This guy's marvelous," Cheryl said, still laughing. "Linda, say hello to Bobby. He's marvelous." "Hello, Bobby," Eileen said. Terrific name for a slasher, she thought. "Well, well, well, hello, Linda," he said. "Me and Bobby's running a tab," Cheryl said. "Which, by the way, time's almost up." "Just having a little fun," Bobby said. "The real fun comes later," Cheryl said. "I hear redheads are a lot of fun," Bobby said. Eileen was wondering how to get rid of Cheryl. If they were running a bar tab... "Matter of fact," Cheryl said, "why don't you put Linda on the tab, too?" "Thanks, no. I've been drinking too much tonight," Eileen said. "This ain't a booze tab," Cheryl said. "What do you say, Bobby? Double your pleasure, double your fun. And later on, you still interested, we do a triad." "What's a triad?" "I read it in a book. It's like 2-on-1. A triad." "I'm not sure I could handle 2 of you," he said. But Eileen could see the spark of ambition in his eyes. Take them both out. Slash them both. Do the hat trick tonight. She had to get rid of Cheryl. "I don't work doubles," she said. "How come?" Bobby asked. "Why should I share this?" she said, and put her hand on his thigh. He thought she was going for the meat. She was frisking him for the knife, found it, too, outlined in his right-hand pants pocket. A 6-incher at least, maybe 8. A shiver ran up her spine. Cheryl was getting nervous.
I'll make it only $10 for the next 20 minutes. How's that? We'll sit here. I'll let you tell me some more of your jokes. Be a lot of fun. What do you say?
I say it's up to Linda here. What do you say, Linda? I told you. I don't do doubles. So long, Cheryl, Bobby said.
You're some cunt, you know that?
She said to Eileen and turned away angrily. I hate it when the fun goes out of it, Bobby said.
We'll have lots of fun, Eileen whispered and tightened her hand on his thigh. You want to get out of here this minute?
No. No, let's talk a while, okay? $1 a minute. Here's a 20. We'll see how it goes, okay?
What is this? Eileen said. An audition?
Well, I'd like to get to know you a little before I... He cut himself short.
Before you what?
She said.
He lowered his voice. You know, he said. Do it to you. What would you like to do to me, Bobby? New and exciting things, he said. So what do you say? Sure, she said. Well, good, he said, and handed her the 20. This buys you till 20 past, she said, and tucked the bill into her bra. She didn't want to open her bag and risk him spotting the .44 under the silk scarf. She was going to blow his brains out with that gun. Make him pay for the 3 women he'd killed. Make him pay, too, for what a man named Arthur Haynes had done to her face, and her body, and her spirit. So, where are all the jokes? She asked. Jokes? A mistake. No. Back off anyway. Cheryl said she'd settle for $10, sit here with you, let you tell her some more jokes.
Oh, yeah.
So let me hear one.
I'd rather talk about you right now.
Sure, Eileen said.
'Cause I find that fun, you know? Learning about other people. Finding out what makes them tick.
You sound like a shrink, she said.
Well, my father's a shrink. Practices in L.A. You know what L.A. stands for?
What?
Lunatic Asylum. Every variety of nut. Do you know the one about the guy who goes into a nut shop?
No.
He stutters badly. He says to the clerk, I'd like to buy a pound of nuts. The clerk says, we have some very nice Brazil nuts at $3 a pound. The guy says, no, that's too high. So the clerk says, I've also got some almonds at $2 a pound. And the guy says, no, that's too high, too. So the clerk says, I've got some peanuts at $1 a pound. And the guy says, fine. The clerk weighs out the peanuts. The guy says, thank you. And I also want to thank you for not mentioning my impediment. And the clerk says, and I want to thank you for not mentioning my deformity. And the guy says, what deformity? The clerk says, well, I have a large nose. The guy says, oh, is that your nose? Your nuts are so high, I thought it was your pecker. Eileen burst out laughing. For the briefest tick of time, she forgot that she was sitting with a man she felt reasonably certain had killed 3 women, and would do his best to kill her if she gave him the slightest opportunity. The laughter surprised her. Tears were rolling down her cheeks. She reached into her bag for a tissue, touched the butt of the .44, and suddenly the laughter stopped. He looked into her eyes. You're going to be a good one, he said. To Parker, Alice was a perfect little doll, blonde hair and blue eyes, beautifully formed breasts, and well-shaped legs. She was wearing a green dress that hugged the womanly curves of her body. He said, I read a lot of these men's magazines, you know, and there's all sorts of letters from men who get turned on by all sorts of women.
Uh-huh. But I've never seen any letters from men who find midgets sexually attractive. I wonder why. I mean, I find you very attractive, Alice. Well, thank you. But that's what I was saying. Many men get turned on by midgets. It's called the Snow White syndrome. Is that what it's called? Yes, because she was living with those 7 dwarfs, you know. Not that dwarfs are midgets. No. They aren't? No. Midgets are perfectly proportioned little people. You certainly are perfectly proportioned, Alice. Well, thank you. But my point is, with so many men attracted to female midgets, you'd think you'd see midgets in ads and all. I never thought of it that way. I mean, wouldn't you like to see me modeling lingerie, for example? Instead, if you're a midget, you have to join the circus, Alice said. Sure, it has become a dirty word. Have you ever seen a movie where there are midgets making love? Never. Have you ever seen a midget cop? He wondered if he should tell her he was a cop. Well, they changed the height requirements, you know. It used to be 5'8". But what I'm asking, if I applied to the police department to become a woman cop, would they only think short? Do you see what I mean? I think of you as delicate. Well, thank you. There's this man, Hans. He's one of the Flying Dutchman, an aerial act, you know. Uh-huh. He wrote me this very hot love letter. I memorized it. What made me think of it was the word delicate. Would you like to hear the letter? Well, sure, Parker said, glancing sidelong to see where Peaches was. Nowhere in sight. He said he wanted to discard my dainty, delicate underthings. That's what made me think of it, delicate. Yes, I see. And pat my pubescent peaks. This is him talking now in the letter. And probe my pithy pussy, and manipulate my miniature mons veneris and Lilliputian labiae. From one of the Flying Dutchmen, huh? Yes. That isn't the guy you're with tonight, is it? No, that's Quentin. He's a clown. Oh, so how long have you been in town? I didn't even know the circus was here, I'll tell you the truth. We won't be here till the spring sometime. We go down to Florida next month and start rehearsing the new season. How long will you be in town? Oh, I don't know. Why? Well, I thought we might get together, Parker said and shrugged. Well, why don't you give me a call? I'd like that, he said. Where can I reach you? We're staying at Quentin's apartment. The 3 of us. Who's the 3 of us? Not the Flying Dutchman, I hope. Willie and Oliver and me. And of course Quentin, whose apartment it is. Quentin Forbes. What's the address? 403 Thompson Street. Downtown, he said, nodding. The 12th. Huh? He wondered if he should explain that in this city you didn't call the 12th the 1-2. But that would have meant telling her he was a cop, and he didn't want to chance losing her. What's the phone number there? He asked. Excuse me. Voice as cold as February. I'd like to go home, Peaches said. Did you plan on accompanying me? Oh, sure, Parker said. It's in the book, Alice said, and smiled up sweetly at Peaches. Peaches tried to think of a scathing midget remark. I'll call you, Parker whispered. It was 2 minutes past midnight when they reached the house. 2 lighted windows showed on the 2nd story. Hawes rang the doorbell. Probably getting ready for bed, he said. You wish, Brown said. Light snapped on downstairs. Who is it? Marie's voice, a trifle alarmed. Well, sure, midnight already. It's Detective Hawes.
Oh. She had been getting ready for bed. She was wearing a long blue robe, laced ruff of a nightgown showing in the V-necked opening. "Have you found him?" she asked at once, referring to Jimmy Brain, of course.
"No, ma'am, not yet," Brown said. "Okay for us to come in?"
"Yes, please," she said. Small entryway, a sense of near shabbiness, worn carpeting, scarred and rickety piece of furniture under a flaking mirror. "We don't have to stand in the hall," she said. She reached for a light switch. A floor lamp came on in the living room, musty drapes, a thrift shop sofa, an old upright piano. A sense of down-at-the-heels existence. "Would you like some coffee or anything?" she asked.
"I could use a cup," Brown said.
"I'll put some up," she said, and walked through a doorway into the kitchen. Brown ran his finger over the surface of a table. Dust. Hawes poked the soil of a potted plant. Dry. The continuing sense of a house run down. Or in neglect, because it would soon be abandoned. She was back.
"Who plays piano?" Hawes asked.
Frank did. A little. She'd grown used to the past tense.
"Mrs. Sebastiani," Brown said. "We were wondering if we could take a look at Brain's room."
She seemed flustered, but that could have been normal. 2 cops showing up on a doorstep at midnight.
"See if there's anything up there might give us a lead," Brown said, watching her.
"I'll have to find a spare key someplace," she said. "Jimmy had his own key, and he came and went as he pleased." She stood stock still in the entrance door to the living room. Was she wondering whether it was safe to show them that room, or trying to remember where the spare key was? A grandfather clock began tolling the hour, 8 minutes late. They listened to the heavy bonging. "Midnight already," she said.
"Your clock's slow," Brown said.
"Let me check the drawer in the kitchen," she said. "Frank used to put a lot of junk in that drawer." They followed her. Dirty dishes stacked in the sink, telephone on the wall, worn linoleum. On the stove, the kettle began whistling. "Help yourselves," she said. "There's cups there and a jar of instant." She opened a drawer. Hawes spooned instant coffee into each of the cups, poured hot water. She was busy searching for the key. "There should be milk in the fridge," she said, "and sugar on the counter there." Hawes opened the refrigerator. Not much in it. Carton of milk, slab of margarine, several containers of yogurt.
"Sugar?"
Hawes asked. Brown shook his head. "This may be it. I really don't know," Marie said. She handed Brown a key. The telephone rang. She was visibly startled. Brown picked up his coffee, began sipping at it. The telephone kept ringing. She lifted the receiver. "Hello?" she said. The detectives watched her. "Oh, hello, Dolores," she said at once. "No, not yet. I'm down in the kitchen," she said, and listened. "There are 2 detectives with me," she said. "No, that's all right, Dolores." She listened again. "They want to look at the garage room." Listening again. "I don't know yet," she said. "Well, they have to do an autopsy first." More listening. "Yes, I'll let you know. Thanks for calling, Dolores." She put the receiver back on the hook. "My sister-in-law," she said.
"Taking it hard, I'll bet," Hawes said. "Let's check out that room," Brown said to Hawes.
"I'll come over with you," Marie said.
"No need," Brown said. "It's cold outside."
Marie watched them as they went out the door and made their way to the garage. Should she have given them the key? Opening the door, the black cop reached into the room. The light snapped on and they went inside. The X-rays showed the bullet dangerously close to Carella's spinal cord. In fact, if it had come to rest a millimeter further to the left, it would have traumatized the cord and caused paralysis. The bullet was firmly seated in the spinal column, very close to the spinal cord and the radicular arteries. It was like operating inside a matchbox. People threw everything in this river. Before, the men doing the dredging had been grateful for the unusually mild weather. Tonight, it was no fun standing in the cold, watching the bucket drop into the black water and coming up again dripping all kinds of shit. Something metallic was glistening on the surface of the muck in the disposal barge.
"What is it?"
Pete Masters shouted.
"We got ourselves a treasure chest," Barney Hanks said. "Throw me that grappling hook."
The case was half submerged in slime. It took Hanks 5 tosses to snag the handle. He pulled in on the line and put the case down on the deck.
"No lock on it,"
Hanks said, and opened the lid. He was looking at a head and a pair of hands. Kling arrived in the canal zone at 13 minutes past midnight. Kling planned on casing Larry's from the outside. Then he'd fade out, cover the place from a vantage point on the street. Didn't want Eileen to know he was there. All he wanted was to be around if she needed him. He wasn't wearing gloves. If he needed to pull the piece, he didn't want gloves getting in the way. Navy blue pea jacket, blue jeans, too lightweight for the sudden chill, and a .38 Detective Special in a holster at his waist. The beef trust was out in force despite the cold. Girls huddled under the lamp posts as though the overhead lights afforded some warmth. On the dock, he could hear rats rustling along the pilings.
"Hey! Blondie! Looking for some fun?"
White girl in her 20s, wearing a long khaki coat and high heels. Opened the coat as he passed. Nothing underneath but garter belt and black stockings. Glimpse of rounded belly and pink-tipped breasts.
"Faggot!"
she yelled, and twirled the coat closed as gracefully as a dancer. The girls with her laughed. Fun on the docks. Larry's bar. He went to the window, peered through the glass. Annie. Good. At least one backup was close by. Eileen. With a big blonde guy wearing glasses. Okay, Kling thought. I'm here. Don't worry. From where Shanahan sat, slumped behind the wheel of the Chevy across the street, he saw only a blonde guy looking through the window of the bar. Shanahan was suddenly alert. Guy was looking through the window, motionless except for the dancing of his blonde hair on the wind. The guy turned. No eyeglasses. Might not be him. On the other hand, Shanahan got out of the car. Guy walking up the street now. How come he wasn't going in the bar? Shanahan fussed with the lock of the car door, watching him sidelong. Minute the guy was 4 car lengths away, Shanahan took off after him. The bar was baited with Eileen, but there were plenty of girls on the street. This guy was suddenly changing his pattern. Shanahan didn't want any of them dying. Eileen didn't like the tricks her mind was beginning to play. She was beginning to think he couldn't be a murderer. Maybe she didn't want him to be a murderer. She knew that if this was the guy, she'd have to end up face to face with him outside, and the knife would come out. It was easier to believe he couldn't possibly be the killer. You're tricking yourself, she thought. There really were a lot of likable things about him. Inside, sitting here at the bar, with the sound of voices everywhere around them, the world seemed safe and cozy and warm. The jokes were some sort of defense system, she realized. But scattered among the incessant jokes, there were glimpses of a shy and somewhat vulnerable person longing to make contact, until another joke was triggered. He was now working on the second $20, which he said should take them to $12.40. If you add up these 20s, he said, $1 a minute, you'll be getting 1/3 of what my dad gets in L.A.
He gets $150 for a 50-minute hour, which ain't bad, huh? For listening to people tell you they have bed bugs crawling all over them. Don't brush 'em on me, right? Well, I guess I already told that one. He hadn't told that one. But suddenly, as he apologized for what he'd thought was repetition, she felt oddly close to him. She knew the "don't brush them on me" joke, yet she wished he'd tell it anyway, and wondered if she was stalling for time. If you have any choice, don't get raised by a psychiatrist. I grew up in a world of don't do this, don't do that. Talk about repression. It was my mother who finally helped me to break out. I make it sound like a prison, don't I? Well, it was. Do you know the one about the lady walking along the beach in Miami? Eileen realized she was already smiling. She sees this guy lying in the sand, and she says, "I don't mean to intrude, but you're very white." The guy looks up and says, "So?" The lady says, "So? How come you're so white?" And the guy says, "This is prison, Parlor. I just got out yesterday." And the lady shakes her head and says, "How long were you in prison?" And the guy says, 30 years. And the lady says, My. What did you do?" The guy says, "I killed my wife with a hatchet and chopped her up." The woman looks at him and says, So you're single." Eileen burst out laughing, and then realized that the joke was about murder. "Anyway, it was my mother who broke me out of prison," Bobby said, "and she had to die to do it." "What do you mean?" "Left me a lot of money. Do you know what she said in her will? 'This is for Robert's freedom to risk enjoying life.' Her exact words, which is just what I've been doing for the past year. Kissed my father off. Told him I'd be happy if I never saw him again, and left L.A. forever. Went to Kansas City, had a good time there. Got the tattoo there, in fact, what the hell. I'd always wanted a tattoo. On to Chicago, plenty of money to take risks, Linda. I owe that to my mother." He nodded thoughtfully. "He's the one who killed her, you know." She looked at him. "I mean, he didn't stick a knife in her or anything. But he was having an affair with our housekeeper, and when she found out about it, it broke her heart. She was never the same again. They said it was cancer, but stress can induce serious illness, and I'm sure that's what caused it, his fooling around with Elga. The money my mother eventually left me was the money she got in the divorce settlement, which I think was poetic justice. I mean, him raising me so strictly while he's fooling around with that Nazi hooker, mind you. And my mother giving me his money so I could risk enjoying life. That was the key word. Risk. I think she wanted me to take risks with that money, which is what I've been doing." "How?" Eileen asked. "By living well," he said. "Living well is the best revenge, isn't it?" He looked at the clock. 5 minutes left, he said. "Would you like to go outside, then?" "Whatever you want," Eileen said. "Maybe that's what we'll do," he said. "Do something new and exciting, huh? Risks," he said and smiled. He had a very pleasant smile. Made him look like a shy little boy, blue eyes soft, almost misty. "In a way, you know," he said, "it has been a sort of revenge, what I've been doing with the money. Traveling, having a good time, taking my risks, and getting even with him in a way for Elga, our housekeeper, you know. It's very difficult to believe that women can be so callous toward other women. I mean, Elga behaving like a common hooker—" "Excuse me, I don't mean any offense," he said, and patted Eileen's hand. "But, you know, you'd think she might have had some sense of concern for my mother. I mean, the woman was married to him for 40 years. He grinned suddenly. "Have you ever seen a snuff movie?" he asked. "Never," she said. "Does that scare you?" he said. "My asking about a snuff movie?" "Yes," she said. "Me too," he said. "I've never seen one either." "Explore it," she thought. Think you might like that? She asked. Killing someone while you were laying her? He looked deep into her eyes as though searching for something. Not if she knew it was going to happen, he said. The call to the squad room came at 20 minutes to 1.
These guys dragging the river turned up this aluminum case like it's big enough to hold a man's head.
Monaghan said.
And his hands. So that's what I got here. A head cut off at the neck and a pair of hands cut off at the wrists.
Uh-huh, Willis said.
So earlier tonight I was with Brown and Genero back out behind this restaurant, the Burgundy. And what we had there was the upper part of a torso in a garbage can. It's what we had. So now I got a head and a pair of hands, and it occurred to me that this might be the same body.
Uh-huh, Willis said.
So what I want to know, does Brown and Genero have a positive make on the stiff?
Hold on, Willis said. Willis pressed the hold button and went over to Brown's desk. He rifled through some papers and stabbed at the lighted extension button and picked up the receiver. Monaghan?
Yeah?
From what I can gather, the body was identified as someone named Frank Sebastiani, male, white, 34 years old.
That's what I got here. A white male around that age.
I've got a picture here, too, Willis said.
Why don't you run over with it?
Monaghan said.
We see we got the same stiff or not.
The apartment over the garage was perhaps 12 feet wide by 20 feet long. In the room was a neatly made double bed, a dresser with a mirror over it, and an upholstered chair. The wall surrounding the mirror was covered with pictures of naked women snipped from men's magazines banned in 7-Eleven stores, all blondes, like Marie Sebastiani. In the bottom drawer of the dresser, the detectives found a pair of crotchless black panties. They were a size 5. What size do you think the lady wears? Brown asked. Could be a 5, Hawes said and shrugged. I thought you were an expert. On bras, I'm an expert. No indication that Brain had packed and taken off in a hurry. Even his razor and shaving cream were still on the sink in the bathroom. Let's see what else we find, Hawes said. What else they found was a sheaf of letters rubber-banded together. The letters were written in purple ink. The first letter read, Jimmy, just say when. Marie. It was dated July 18th. When did he start working for them? Brown asked. 4th of July? Fast worker, this lady, Brown said. The letters chronicled a rather active sex life between the lady and the sorcerer's apprentice, Marie having been compulsive about jotting down everything she had done to Jimmy in the recent past, and then outlining everything she hadn't yet done to him, but which she planned to do to him. She did a lot of things to him. The last letter was dated October 27th, 4 days before the murder and dismemberment of the lady's husband. She suggested in this last letter that what she wanted to do to Jimmy on Halloween night was tie him to the bed in his black silk undershorts and spread herself open over him in her crotchless panties, and then... Brown turned suddenly toward the window. Hawes turned at the same moment. An automobile had just pulled into the driveway. At 10 minutes to 1, 10 minutes after Bobby had suggested they go outside, Eileen went to the ladies' room. By the time Annie got to the ladies' room, Eileen was already in one of the stalls. Annie did a quick check for feet. The other stalls were empty. Yes or no? She asked. Yes, Eileen said. Her voice sounded odd. You okay? Fine. Checking out the hardware. The door opened. Eileen looked pale. She went to the sink, touched up her lipstick. You going out now? Annie asked. Yes. Same odd voice. I'll be there, Annie said simply. Good, Eileen said. Parker was beginning to feel married. You went to the party with me, Peaches said, not with little Miss Muffet. If a person can't have a simple conversation... That wasn't a conversation, Peaches said. That was a person and a half exchanging deep sighs and meaningful glances. I don't think it's nice of you to make midget jokes, Parker said. I thought she was E.T. in drag. That's what I mean, Parker said. I'm sorry if you're upset, he added. He was sorry. He was thinking he would much prefer spending the winter in Peach's probably warm and generous bed instead of his own narrow bed in his grubby little apartment. He was also thinking tomorrow was time enough to give Alice a call. What bothers me is I thought we were having such a good time together, Peaches said. I don't see any problem. What we'll do, Parker said, is we'll go back to your place, and we'll have a drink and maybe watch some television. That sounds nice, she said, and hugged his arm. And we'll forget about Eensy Beensy Spider. I already forgot about her, Parker said. They were just passing one of those subway kiosk newsstands on the corner. The owner was kneeling over a stack of newspapers, cutting the cord around them. Parker was looking down at the headline. The headline read, 2 cops shot. 3 midgets sought. The car in the driveway of the Sebastiani house was a 1979 Cadillac Seville, silver. The woman who got out of the caddy was tall and leggy, wearing a black coat the color of her hair. She went directly to the front door of the house and rang the bell. Who the hell is that? Hawes said. They came out of Larry's bar at exactly 1 a.m. Eileen's hand hovered over the open top of her bag, close to the butt of the gun. Bobby had his right hand in his pants pocket. On the knife, she thought. Annie was the first of the 3 detectives to spot them. She had taken up position in the darkened doorway of a Chinese noodle factory. Eileen came out of the bar like a flare, red hair blowing in the wind. Annie gave them a 20-yard lead and then fell in behind them. She cursed the hooker heels she was wearing because they made such a clatter. The guy kept chatting up Eileen as they dissolved into the darkness between the lighted lampposts. Eileen's red hair was the beacon. Kling was the second detective to spot them. The street was dark where he waited in the shadow of an abandoned tool works. The woman was unmistakably Eileen. He knew every nuance of her walk, the long stride, the rhythmic jiggle of her buttocks. He was about to fall in behind them when he saw Annie. Good, he thought. She's in place. He stayed on the opposite side of the street, 10 feet behind Annie, who was working hard to keep up without showing herself. The formation could have been a classic tailing triangle. 1 cop behind the quarry, another cop ahead of them on the same side of the street, a 3rd cop on the opposite side of the street. Except it was lacking the 3rd cop. Or so Kling thought. Shanahan was the 3rd cop. He'd been tailing Kling from the moment he'd spotted him peering through the window of the bar. When Eileen finally came out with the 2nd blonde guy, Shanahan's blonde took off after them. This other blonde guy was showing too much interest. Shanahan fell in behind him again. Up ahead, Eileen and her blonde disappeared around the corner. Shanahan's blonde hesitated only a moment. He seemed undecided whether to make a move or not. Then he pulled a gun and started across the street. Annie recognized Kling at once. He had a gun in his hand. "Kling!" she shouted. In that instant, Shanahan came thundering up, yelling, "Stop! Police!" "Mike!" Annie shouted. "He's on the job!" The realization came to all 3 of them in the same instant. Without a word, they all looked up the street. Eileen and her man were gone. A minute ago, she'd had 3 backups. Now she didn't have any. Dolores was Frank Sebastiani's older sister. 5 feet 10, black hair, blue eyes, 38, 39 years old. Hugging Marie to her when Brown and Hawes came over from the garage. Dolores seemed surprised to see them. "How do you do?" she said and glanced at Marie. She turned to Marie. "I'm sorry it took me so long to get here. What time did you call Mom?" "It must have been around 11:30, Marie said. "Yeah, she called me right afterward. I felt like I'd been hit by a locomotive," Dolores said. "Would anyone like some coffee?" she asked.
A take-charge lady, Hawes thought. Tragedy in the family? Here she is at 1 a.m, ready to make coffee.
"There's some on the stove," Marie said.
Poor baby, Dolores said, and hugged her sister-in-law close. She looked at Brown and said, "My mother told me you think Jimmy did it. Is that right?" "That's a strong possibility," Brown said, and looked at Marie. "It's hard to believe," Dolores said, and shook her head. "My mother said you have to do an autopsy. I wish you wouldn't, really. That's really upsetting her." It occurred to Brown that she did not know that her brother's body had been dismembered. "Well, ma'am," he said, "an autopsy is mandatory in a trauma death."
Brown was looking at Marie. It had further occurred to him that on the phone with Dolores not an hour ago, Marie herself had advised her sister-in-law about the autopsy. Now Dolores sounded as if the information had come from her mother. He tried to remember the exact content of the conversation, Marie's end of it anyway. "Hello, Dolores? No, not yet. I'm down in the kitchen." Which meant her sister-in-law had asked her if she was in bed, and she'd told her, "No, I'm down here with 2 detectives." Which meant Dolores knew there were 2 detectives here, so why had she looked surprised to find them? They want to look at the garage room. So you had to figure Dolores had asked what 2 detectives were doing there, and then the business about the autopsy, which Dolores had just now talked about as if it had come from her mother. But if Dolores had called here just before leaving the house... On the phone, Marie hadn't said anything about expecting her, just, "I'll let you know," meaning about the autopsy, and thanks for calling. Brown looked Dolores dead in the eye and said, "Did you call here about an hour ago?" The telephone rang. This time the ringing caused an immediate look of panic to flash in Marie's eyes. She turned toward the kitchen as if it had burst into flames, stopped, then looked blankly at the detectives. "Want me to get it?" Brown asked. "No, It may be my mother-in-law," she said, and headed for the kitchen, Brown right behind her. She was thinking, "You goddamn fool, I told you the cops were here." Brown stood in the kitchen doorway, his arms folded across his chest. Marie lifted the receiver. "Hello," she said, and listened. "It's for you," she said, and handed the receiver to Brown. Parker felt like a real cop. The feeling was somewhat exhilarating. The newspaper story accompanying the headline told him everything he needed to know about the liquor store holdups. One of the holdup victims had described the thieves as midgets. She had further told the police that one of the midgets was named Alice. Parker didn't have to be a detective to know that there couldn't be too many midgets named Alice in this city. He put Peaches in a taxi, then hailed a cruising patrol car. The 2 uniformed cops advised Parker they didn't know if they had the authority to provide transportation for a detective from the 87. Parker said, "This is a homicide here. Open the fucking door." The cop riding shotgun unlocked the back door for him. Parker sat in the back of the car like a common criminal, a metal grill separating him from the cops up front. Dolores, Marie, and Hawes were sitting in the living room when Brown got off the phone. Brown walked in looking very solemn. Brown tugged casually at his earlobe before he started talking. Hawes picked up the signal at once. Dog and pony act on the way. "They found the rest of the body," Brown said. Marie looked at him. "Head and hands," Brown said. "In the river." "I'm sorry," he said to Dolores, "but your brother's body was dismembered. I hate to break it to you this way." "Oh, my God," Dolores said. "Guys dredging the river pulled up this case. Head and hands in it," Brown said. Hawes was trying to catch the drift. "You knew he'd been—" Dolores asked Marie. "Yes," she said. "I didn't tell Mom because I knew what it would do to her." I hate to go over this another time, Mrs. Sebastiani, Brown said. But I wonder if you can give me a description of your husband again, so we can close this out.
Oh, I have it right here, Hawes said. He was catching on. Nobody closed out a case while the murderer was running loose.
Male, white, 34 years old.
That right? Brown asked Marie.
5'11", 170.
Hawes figured she didn't know what was coming, but was bracing herself. Hawes didn't know what was coming either. He had a hunch.
Hair black, he read. Eyes.
Do we have to go over this? She said. I identified the body.
My brother's hair was black, yes, Dolores said softly.
Eyes blue,
Hawes said. Blue eyes, yes, Dolores said, like mine.
Mrs. Sebastiani, Brown said. The head we found in the river doesn't match your husband's photograph.
Marie blinked at him.
It means the dead man isn't your husband.
Are you saying my brother isn't dead? Dolores asked.
Mrs. Sebastiani, Brown said. Would you mind very much if I read you this description of Jimmy Brain?
I really don't see why we have to go over this 100 times, she said. If you were doing your job right, you would have found Jimmy by now.
White male, Brown read. 32 years old. Height 6 feet. Weight 180.
Brown was closing in, and she knew it.
Hair black. Eyes brown.
Yes?
Mrs. Sebastiani.
The eyes were brown.
Yes, I just told you.
On the head in the river. The eyes were brown. He turned to Dolores.
Did your brother Frank ever have his appendix removed?
No, I don't.
Was he ever in a skiing accident?
He never skied in his life, Dolores said.
The techs printed both hands, Brown said. We're running a comparison check right this minute. Mrs. Sebastiani, you seem to know a lot about Jimmy Brain. Maybe you know whether he's ever been fingerprinted.
All I know about him...
Right down to his beauty spot, Brown said.
Marie, what is he talking about? Dolores said.
You and your husband killed Jimmy Brain, didn't you? Brown said.
Marie sat quite still.
Mrs. Sebastiani, Brown said. Would you like to tell us where your husband is?
Parker opened the door with a skeleton key. On the sofa bed in the living room, a male midget was asleep. He jumped up the minute the door opened.
Hello,
Parker whispered and showed him the gun.
Are the others asleep?
Willie nodded.
We're going to wake them up,
Parker whispered.
Don't yell, or I'll shoot you.
In one bedroom, Oliver Twist was asleep with a full-sized woman. The woman was very fat and very blonde. He nudged the midget. The midget popped up in bed.
Shh, Parker said. It's the police.
Up to now, Willie had thought they were dealing with a burglar. It was a cop in here, his worst nightmare realized.
Wake up your lady,
Parker told Oliver. Oliver nudged the fat blonde.
Go away,
she said. Parker pulled the blanket off her. She sat up, annoyed.
Police,
Parker said, smiling.
What?
She said. You the one did the driving?
Quentin did the driving,
Oliver said. Quentin, the guy at the party. Parker herded them into the other bedroom and snapped on the lights. Quentin Forbes was in bed with Alice. They were both naked.
Police!
Parker shouted, and they both jumped up at the same time. Hello, Alice, he said, smiling.
Hello, Andy,
she said, and reached under the pillow. Please, Alice, don't, he said. She must have known she was looking into the eyes of a cop who had seen it all and heard it all.
Okay,
she said, and put down the gun. Forbes said, This is an outrage.
It is, I know, Parker said.
The man in his undershorts was halfway out the window.
That's a long drop, mister,
O'Brien said. Mr. Sebastiani, Willis said. There was no fire escape. Willis wondered where the hell he thought he was going. My name is Theo Hardeen, he said. Mr. Sebastiani, Willis said. At this very moment, your wife is driving in from Collinsworth with 2 detectives, upon whose instructions and advice we're... I don't have any wife in... They found a chainsaw in your garage, Willis said. There's a lot of blood on the saw, O'Brien said. Sir, we're arresting you for the crime of murder, Willis said, and began reeling off Miranda Escobedo by rote. She blew it, huh? Sebastiani said. You both did, Willis said. She'd lost her backups, she knew that. Alone at last, you and me. Not in that single hotbed hotel where there was a chance they might find her before dawn, but in one of those 50 or 60 rented rooms. He'd locked the door behind them and put the key into the pocket with the knife. That was almost an hour ago. He'd been talking ever since. He was lying on the bed with his hands behind his head, and she was sitting in the wooden chair across the room, her bag lying near her dangling hand, and she felt like a psychiatrist listening to a patient. She was ready for anything, but nothing came, except talk. Maybe she was partly to blame for what happened, you know, he said. My mother. I love her to death, don't get me wrong. She's the one who made my freedom possible, may she rest in peace. But was it all my father's fault? Can I just hold him responsible for laying Elga? Elga again. Hardly a sentence out of his mouth without mentioning this housekeeper. She was a school teacher, you know, my mother. Did I tell you? Only 100 times, Eileen thought. Put him through medical school. Left me with Elga all the while I was growing up. Well, listen, I don't blame her for that. She was teaching to support the family, you know. That was a lot of responsibility. Do you know the one about the kindergarten teacher who gets the obscene phone call? She picks up the phone and says, hello, and the voice on the other end said, doo-doo, pee-pee, caca. That's an old one. You probably heard it. I hated Elga. If my father was laying Elga, maybe part of the fault was my mother's. Do you see what I mean? She said she hated teaching, but why did she take it so seriously? Shouldn't she have taken care of our needs, too? I don't want to be your shrink, Eileen thought. Make her goddamn move. But he wouldn't stop talking. I'll tell you the truth. Sometimes I felt like killing her. Here it comes, Eileen thought. Fucking dedicated schoolteacher. She watched him. Ignoring the people who loved her. Kept watching him. Ready. Waiting. Do you know what she did once, Elga? I was 8 years old. She took off her bloomers. Bloomers. A child's expression. Showed herself to me. Silence. I ran away and locked myself in the bathroom. Silence. Elga told my mother I'd locked myself in the bathroom and wouldn't come out. My mother asked me why I'd done that. Elga was standing right there. I said I was afraid of the lightning. It was raining that day. Elga smiled. The next time we were alone, she forced me... He sat up suddenly. Do you know the one about the guy who goes into a sex shop to buy a merkin? The clerk says, do you want this sent, sir, or will you take it with you? The guy says, no, I'll eat it here. He laughed harshly and abruptly, and then said, how would you like me to eat your pussy? Sure, she said. Come here and take off your bloomers. You come here, Eileen said. He stood up. He put his right hand in his pocket. She thought, yes, take out the knife, you son of a bitch. And then she thought, no, don't, Bobby. Bobby, she said wearily, I'm a cop. She took the gun out of her handbag and leveled it at him. A smile cracked over his face. Put the knife on the floor, Bobby. What knife? The knife in your pocket, Bobby. Put it on the floor. He took the knife out of his pocket. Good. Now put it on the floor, she said. Like a good little boy, huh? Bobby, I'm not your mother. I'm not Elga. I'm not going to hurt you. Just listen to the shrink, he said. You're a fucking hooker. Who the fuck do you think you're kidding?
Bobby, please drop the knife. Say pretty please, he said, and the blade snicked open. The gun was in her hand. She had him cold. Don't move, she said. Do you know the one about the guy who tries to rob a bank? Sticks the gun into the teller's face and says, "Don't muss a movel, this is the fuck-up." He took a step toward her. "This isn't fun anymore," he said, slicing the knife across the air between them. "Whoosh!" he said, and he came at her. Her first bullet took him in the chest, knocking him toward the bed. She fired again, hitting him in the shoulder, spinning him around. Then she fired a third time. Then, she would never understand why, she kept shooting into his lifeless body, watching the eruptions of blood along his spine, saying over and over again, "I gave you a chance," until the gun was empty. There was blood on the surgeon's gown. Teddy Carella caught her breath. She read his lips. She thought he said, "We shot him." "We got it," the surgeon said. She let out her breath. "He'll be okay." Eileen was sitting at the long table in the interrogation room, just sitting there, looking at her hands. "I'm sorry if I screwed up," Kling said. "I'm quitting," she said. "What do you mean?" "The force." "No, you're not." "I'm quitting, Kling. I don't like what it did to me. What it keeps doing to me." "Eileen, you—" "I'm quitting this city, too." Kling reached for her hand. She pulled it away. "What about me?" he said. "What about me?" she said. The phone rang at a little past 2 in the morning.
"Peaches,
The voice said.
this is Phil Hendricks at Camera Works.
"Him again."
I want you to take off your blouse."
"Listen, you creep," she said.
"This is Andy Parker,"
He said.
"I'm on the corner. Is it too late to come up?"
"You dope," she said.
It was the last trick of the night.
Tricks by Ed McBain. Read by Joe Spano. This program was produced by Susan Perrin, directed by Audrey Coleman, and abridged by Elizabeth Chin. Tape editor was Karen Perlman, and production coordinator was Linda Ross.